First of all, I want to talk about, I used to ask people, do you know what blockchain is? 9 months ago, 12 months ago, 18 months. Well, some people said they hadn't heard of it 9 months ago. Many heard of it, but didn't know anything about it. I think that's where still a lot of people are in general. Everybody's heard of it. You might know a couple things. And most people have told me that Bitcoin and blockchain are the same thing. So today, it's still, from when I go around, a lot of it's the same thing. I think people are realizing blockchain and Bitcoin aren't the same thing, but they don't know. A lot of people have a negative feeling about the whole industry, a lot of because of the scam ICOs that you might have heard of, which we'll talk about. And a lot of people have written this off as a passing fad. But that's the farthest from the truth. So real quick, I want to talk about the differences between crypto assets. I call them crypto assets. And as I go through this presentation, and as we'll talk to the panelists, people will say things, definitions that, again, the industry hasn't quite coalesced around exactly what is it crypto tokens, cryptocurrency, crypto asset, crypto. Now people are just saying crypto, right? I tend to call it crypto assets because some things act in a certain way and everything, so I feel like crypto asset covers everything.
Mark, I heard something recently that actually compared where we are now with where we were with the internet. And if you don't know things like blockchain or token or cryptocurrency, think back to when the internet first started. Nobody really knew what bandwidth meant or website or download. Those were all words that were kind of being defined. So we're kind of in that stage with some of the vocabulary here now as well, where people just don't know yet. Some of it's brand new.
Yeah, that's a good point, and you'll find that. So we're all trying to figure out exactly what it will be. SEC regulations might tell us what things are exactly what they'll be. But right now, I'll call it crypto asset. And as the program goes on, you'll kind of get a feeling of what things are. So crypto assets, it's a medium of exchange created and stored electronically in the blockchain, which we're going to talk about this in more depth. And it uses encryption techniques to control the creation of monetary units and to verify the transfer of funds. So that's how these crypto assets are different than, say, the dollar, or more importantly, different than digital cash. Did anybody use any sort of digital cash when the internet first started happening? There was like beans and flues, and there was DigiCash, and you might not have necessarily used those things, but if you used Facebook credits, or they kind of had a Facebook token for a little bit, and some of these websites, you might buy credits on some websites, and that's sort of a form of digital cash, right? There's a reason why crypto assets are much different than that, which we'll talk about, and primarily it's the way they use encryption techniques to control the creation of monetary units and to verify what you have. So the best and first and most known example is Bitcoin, which is a very specific digital asset, and it can be treated sometimes as an asset, a store of value like gold, or a currency like the US dollar. I say that it's no longer a currency. Now it can act like a currency. I'm not saying to some extent it's not, but I say it isn't because I feel like it's long past the ability to be legitimately a currency. And this is more my opinion than, and some people feel this way. It's just not stable. It goes up, it goes down, it goes, in December, I quadrupled my money in like 2 months or 3 months last year. It just went down like 10% the last 2 days, both days. So it goes up and down. And the thing that was great, you would think like, oh, this Bitcoin is awesome. It's going up, and my my $100 is now worth $500. But it's actually, wow, that's great. It's great to have that, right? But you can't spend it because you can't. If you know it's going to keep going up, or you think it's going to keep going up, like who's going to spend $10. There's a story of somebody bought a pizza. When the first purchase ever with Bitcoin was a pizza back in, I believe, 2009, maybe 2010. And that pizza would be worth $7.5 million like last December. Because they spent, I think, 10 Bitcoin or something like that. No, it's more than that. It's like 100 Bitcoin for this pizza. So it was the first offline transaction of Bitcoin, and now it's worth $7 million. So I feel like currency is out the window, in my opinion, but it really acts like a store of value. It really acts like gold. And I'm going to talk about how it's similar to gold, again, in my opinion, and the opinion of some of the literati that you read. Blockchain is a technology that makes it all happen. And Bitcoin and all the other tokens do not work without the blockchain. Bitcoin is an application that lives on top of the blockchain. Blockchain is an underlying technology that makes it all happen. Bitcoin is one use of the blockchain. Does everybody remember AOL Instant Messenger? Do you remember when the internet came along and we were at work and we want to talk to our friends, and before Instant Messenger or before email, right? You're gonna call people and make arrangements, and then when AOL Instant Messenger came along, you could be at work and you could type like, hey, what's going on, and let's go out tonight, and blah blah blah, and all that stuff. It's pretty easy. You can sit on top of your desktop. And that really spread like wildfire, AOL Instant Messenger. But it was one application on the entire internet. And some people thought like AOL Instant Messenger, and really like, let's just talk about AOL. People thought AOL was the internet, right? AOL was always on top of the internet. It was a layer on top. And you would go into AOL, you would dial up and get the noises and all that stuff, and you would go on to AOL, and what that really was it was their layer on top of the internet, and that was your access to it, and they would feed you stock quotes and give you news and all that stuff. And there was a way to actually get onto the internet through AOL, but you weren't really surfing the internet when you were on AOL. It was one application, one instantiation of the internet. And that's what Bitcoin is to blockchain. And Bitcoin is the most popular instantiation because this happened. So back in 2011, it was only a few cents, maybe $1. And then in December, you could see it spiked. So it's been a year since that big spike. And since then, it's come down again. But that's what really drove everybody. That's why a lot of people got into trying to understand it more, taking it more seriously. And a lot of people got very wealthy. And it's one reason why the market got flooded with knockoffs. Can anybody name anything more than Bitcoin? Does anybody know any other coins? Litecoin, yeah. Ethereum. Ethereum's a big one. But there's a lot now. And as of April, so this is a little old, there's 1,565 active tokens. Does anybody know how many there are now? It probably hasn't gone up that, it keeps going up every day, right?
But some drop
People,
off as well.
Some go out of business, and that's why it's probably around 1,500. Actually, Vishal, do you know? No? Okay. I did this presentation and I quoted January, 6 months ago, and I think it was, something like at 1,000. So it was really going high because of that December push, and in the first quarter of this year, people, even though Bitcoin and all the coins were coming down, we have the euphoria and everybody's doing ICOs, so people were still pushing this.
I think it's really important to know that when we talk about crypto, there are really two kinds, and you indicated about store of value and using it as a medium of exchange. And certainly Bitcoin is a store of value, but there's a lot of crypto out there, a growing number of different cryptocurrencies that truly are a medium of exchange.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to the day when we see Amazonian dollars and the Alibaba dollars, et cetera, and they're going to vie, they're going to be competing for control, and there are a lot of issues, political issues that we're going to have to deal with, including the primacy of the US dollar. And there are a lot of very important sort of public policy issues that are implicated in all of this, and I'm sure we'll get into it.
That's absolutely true. So there are some coins that are actually trying to act exactly like currency, in that they track the dollar exactly. There's one called Tether, although I think that's kind of not doing so well anymore. But it's tracking the dollar, so the value of a tether is always $1. So while it'll never raise, I mean, it's close to $1. Sometimes it's $1.01, whatever. But it pretty much tracks the dollar. So there's some that are acting like that. Some act like gold. Some are only, Bitcoin you could use everywhere. That, in theory, that'll accept it. But then some are just tokens that act only within its own like mini economy, like a Facebook token would or something like that.
Right. I think one of the important points to make as well when we talk about Bitcoin as a store of value, and we talk about how sometimes they view these currencies as, or these tokens as currency because they're so volatile. We also have to take a broader view of the world, right? If you're sitting in Venezuela, Bitcoin is the most stable currency that you've seen in the last 30 years.
That's right.
So sometimes we can kind of think a little too much isolated in the United States because we have the most stable currency in the history of the last 500 years. But it can be a currency in some places.
Yeah.
One of the biggest issues that you have with Bitcoin is when you're pragmatically, one of the problems you have with using it as a currency is it takes time for the currency to transact. You can't buy a slice of pizza with Bitcoin because it will take 15 minutes for the actual Bitcoin to transfer.
To throw the flag and you say, yes, you can, lightning channels and other things.
Yes, but in the kind of the traditional sense. So I think it's some of the challenges that we have with larger cryptos that are being solved with other cryptos.
And that's what makes this also exciting is that, while you say, I can't really see Bitcoin being used as a currency, we look back 15 years from now, it may be completely different because of the way technology has evolved. And, it's exciting. There's a lot going on.
It will be, but it'll be a version of Bitcoin, I think, right? I mean, just because it's a 10-minute thing, it'll be it's getting a little too detailed right now, but it's true. There'll be versions of Bitcoin that will be a currency, and they'll be borderless, and it could be global, and everybody will be using it. But back to this, so it got popular, Bitcoin and all the others. It got popular not just because of the price raise, because people started doing ICOs, which were essentially the coin version of an IPO. So a company would want to raise money, and instead of going through all the regulatory hurdles that you have to do for an IPO, and you got to spend like $1 million or however much, however much you got to spend to have your company go IPO. People would just say, "Hey, buy my coin. It's going to do this, this, and that, and it's going to be useful, and it's going to be better than Bitcoin, and all this stuff." And they would raise, at first they were raising like $5 million, and they could raise it like with nothing. And then one of them came out, I forget which one. They raised like $150 million in like 3 days or something, or 30 minutes. I mean, it was crazy. Now there was a lot of backroom stuff going on with that they raised all that. There was little, whatever. There was some backroom stuff going on that they could raise that much money that quickly. But the fact is, they were able to do it. And since then, regulations have kind of started to come down, and they kind of put a clamp on that, and you can't do it as much. But for the last year or so, that's been happening, and people have been making money. So that's made everything a lot more popular. Ethereum you started to be able to make business use cases for using the blockchain. And we're going to talk about that a little later. But you were able to create these things called smart contracts, which could govern business. Like you could have automatic payments based on a performance of a service automatically without people having to do anything. If this happened, it would automatically get paid. And there was that's how a smart contract could potentially work. So people started thinking of use cases for that, so things went up. And then, they created this Kickstarter-like creation of projects with these, just building out the infrastructure of the blockchain as they had to do with the internet 20 years ago. But largely it was because it was free money.
It's a version of crowdfunding.
Right. ICO is crowdfunding. So what exactly is the blockchain? Picture as a spreadsheet. And there'll be more, but picture as a spreadsheet used to record transactions, right? When transactions get put onto the blockchain, let's say I'm going to pay Kurt 10 Bitcoin a year ago because I can't afford it. I can't afford it now, but when it was like at $10, I could afford it. If I was going to pay Kurt 10 Bitcoin, it would get recorded onto the blockchain. And how that would work is it gets, I make the transaction happen through the wallet exchange, or however I send the money. I understand what his keys are, and I send the money. And it gets recorded onto a block, and then the block, and when we talk about the mining process, Jeff will be able to talk about that. The block gets recorded onto the entire chain of blocks. Like blocks just get added to each other, and it's essentially like cells or lines on a spreadsheet, and it just gets added to each other. And the thing is, they never erase another line. Like a previous line never gets erased. It can never get edited. If you ever want to edit some kind of transaction, you got to show like a deletion and then an addition. There's no editing of any information that's on the blockchain.
Mark, one way that I've kind of learned to explain it that helps people is I actually use the analogy of a check register. Remember, when you write your checks, you write all that information. Because when you update a spreadsheet, what you get is the current state of what's in that spreadsheet, right? Because the data that you've updated goes away. Whereas with a ledger, a checkbook ledger, you can go back and look at the history. Even though you add a new line, you're not erasing or updating the old lines. Does that make sense? So the blockchain actually stores the transaction history in a way where it's always there. It doesn't get replaced when you do a transaction. It doesn't get overwritten like a spreadsheet.
Right.
It gets appended like a
So my transaction gets written into a block, which is like a line on a thing, and that block gets written into the blockchain. It gets put onto the blockchain, and all the miners on the blockchain are verifying to make sure it's all correct and that you have the money to give and all this stuff like that happen. So it's like a ledger, but it's distributed across thousands and thousands of computers. The idea that eventually it'll be millions of computers across the world. At this date, February 28th, there was 11,558 computers that were actually running the blockchain. And that goes up and down. You can imagine when the price of Bitcoin is $20,000 of Bitcoin, there's a lot more nodes that are running it than when it's $4,000. So as the price of Bitcoin goes up, there's more people on the network. Now that doesn't mean there's only 11,000 people using Bitcoin or transacting Bitcoin. There's millions of people that own Bitcoin, that have transacted Bitcoin, but there's only 11,000 computers right now, or at that date, and those are the places that have the ledger on their computer.
Can you describe what you mean by distributed?
Yeah, I say that because if you copy the ledger, first of all, there could be errors, people could change things, I could copy it and change it, or I could do whatever. The ledger is on all of these computers, and it's not like there's no central ledger that's everywhere, that's accessible and then copied on these computers to keep it like a safe network. It is on everybody's computer. There's a record of this ledger that's on every one of these computers that's on the blockchain.
And they're all
that mine's a
updated.
blockchain.
Everybody gets updated and kept in sync. So that the version and the copy of the ledger that I have is the same that Mark has and the same that everybody else has.
Can you look at this as like a multi-comparison changes? Like there's a function in its own.
Good.
Yeah.
So she said you can look at it as there's one person in the room and there's 10 mirrors in the room. The reflection is on 10 mirrors. You could look at that because whatever happens to that person, it's going to be on all the mirrors, right?
Well,
So
with one caveat to that, I think there's an important point missing of why this is interesting for business. Because it's a distributed network and there are, the same version of this is on multiple computers. The other aspect of this is the encrypted, secure aspect to it. And that's really the security function, is that since it is, quote, everywhere, or at least in this instance, 11,000 nodes, it's the checks and balances that make sure that the data, as opposed to if you take a centralized network where someone hacks in, you read about it in the news, they get access to all your personal information. That's much more difficult when it's on I don't agree that it's not a decentralized network. I think this is decentralized. But the point is that when it doesn't exist consolidated in one place with a singular point of access, it is exponentially harder, but not impossible, but exponentially harder to break into.
Decentralized still means there's nexuses of centralization and power and things like that. Even when decentralized, like in theory, the United States is a decentralized country, right? Like you have the federal government and they can tell you what to do, but then every state, that to me is a decentralized network, is the United States, where every state has its own power and stuff. To me, distributed there is, at least on Bitcoin, right now I'm talking about the Bitcoin, and generally, for the most part, public blockchains that are pushed out there and not run by one person. And that's where you have the true security, is when it's public. So in a sense. So I'll get to that. But so before we said it's a ledger, right? Now we're saying like Excel or whatever. Now it's a distributed ledger. Now it's more like Google Sheets as we start learning more about it. Now it's more like Google Sheets, where in theory it could be on everybody's computer. But these computers and nodes, they record transactions to the blockchain and they continually reconcile and verify. Every time there's things there's signatures on each block. When the block gets put onto the chain, there's signatures on the block that prove the veracity of every block before it. The thousands and thousands and millions of blocks before it, there's cryptographic ways to prove that everything is still accurate. So if somebody goes in, if one of those computers of 11,000 changes a block, there's ways to understand that block has been changed. That computer, the information on that computer gets ignored, and the rest of the blockchain goes and builds the blockchain. They get recorded, continually reconciled and verified, not only the information but the veracity through consensus mechanisms and solving complex mathematical formulas. So there's these signatures that are on it. So now the blockchain is a distributed ledger. We got to that point. It's a distributed ledger that is transparent. It's public and on thousands of computers. And you just saw, like I had a website that showed exactly where those computers are, right? You can see that there's exactly 11,558 computers. You saw that it was on a map where they are. And you can also see every transaction that happens on the Bitcoin blockchain, on the Ethereum blockchain. There's websites that you could go in to actually look at everybody's transactions. Now those transactions don't have your personal information. You just see that Bitcoin was sent from here to there, or came out of this wallet and things like that. But it's very transparent. So it's on thousands of computers. It's immutable because of the way that the system works. The consensus makes alterations practically impossible. It's verifiable through this unique cryptographic process. And it's unhackable because of all three. Now I say it's virtually unhackable. If there was only like 3 computers on this network and not 11,000, you could probably hack it. It's a lot easier. And the reason why that the value of the network, there's a network effect to Bitcoin and to Ethereum and to some of these other ones. when it's only worth a few cents, there's not that many computers on it, and it could get hacked. And in fact, the founder, the person that created Bitcoin, very, very early on, was worried about some of those things, and you know, there was a story where WikiLeaks wanted to use Bitcoin as a form of payment, and this was back in like 2009 or 2010 when Bitcoin had just started, and the founder of not the founder, but the guy who created Bitcoin and the blockchain technology said, please don't accept Bitcoin. We're not ready for it. We're not ready for all the attention that'll happen if WikiLeaks starts accepting Bitcoin, and you know, all the government agencies are going to be on us, and then people are going to try to hack us, and it's just, we're not ready for it. So, but now that so many computers are on it, and the value is there as the value gets in with all these miners and stuff like that, it's pretty unhackable. And actually, I will say, the blockchain itself, Bitcoin blockchain, has never been hacked. You've heard of it being hacked, right? Has everybody generally heard of it being hacked? What you heard of it being hacked is applications that are built on top of it. So some wallet program or some exchange program of funds, that stuff gets hacked because somebody doesn't write good enough security for these applications. Like if AOL email, or like, you know, with the Sony hacks or something like that, those things can get hacked. The blockchain itself doesn't get hacked.
Let me see if I can paint a picture to help, because it's a complex topic. If you think about a transaction, like me sending a Bitcoin to somebody, right? Think of that transaction as being a line or a sentence, okay? And all of groups of transactions get put together to form a block. That block is like a chapter. You take those multiple sentences, you put them together, you now have a chapter. As you build multiple blocks or multiple chapters and put them together, you have a book. The blockchain is the book, okay? And the reason that that book is secure is because every time you build a block or you write one of these chapters, cryptography is used to create a digital fingerprint of that block, okay? Unique digital fingerprint of that block. And if any piece of data in that block gets changed, that fingerprint changes. But as you build blocks on top of each other, those fingerprints are used between blocks. They're referenced in blocks to link them together. That's where the chain part of the blockchain comes. And as you've chained these blocks together, essentially every block is referencing the block that came before it because of these digital fingerprints. Any piece of data, you change a period or a comma or one character or one bit in that data block, you have to recalculate that fingerprint and reproduce every block to the current block, or the network is going to kick you out because your data doesn't match everybody else's.
Yeah.
Does that kind of help explain how the blocks are changed?
So, in that kind of a self-sustaining environment, every transaction makes it exponentially harder to hack the collaterals.
Every block that gets published to the blockchain makes it harder to change blocks that came previous. So if you want to change data in block 12 and the blockchain's on block 92, you've got to recreate every block up to 92 before the entire network puts block 93 on top of the chain.
And you have to do it on 12,000 computers.
So it becomes so
It's like
much more,
impossible.
it becomes so much more expensive for a potential hacker to try to cheat the system, and it instead motivates a would-be hacker to participate. And instead of trying to hack the system, they would rather make money trying to verify that the transactions are valid. And that's why it motivates people to get into mining. A lot of would-be hackers end up becoming miners because it's just less expensive and there's more of a profit opportunity to make money verifying transactions rather than trying to hack them.
But,
Yep.
and there's
So-
easier stuff to steal.
That's right. But even if somebody were able to hack a block and make a change, and let's say that they were able to do that, they still can't go into my wallet and steal any value from me. All they can do is change a record that says I sent you a Bitcoin, and it allows them to now spend that Bitcoin a second time. So somebody's going to get cheated, right? But they can't steal your money out of your.
I think it's a really important point, because it's true, you're not necessarily going to steal my money. But one thing that is important to keep in mind is, fundamentally, if a blockchain gets hacked, everybody's money becomes almost worthless.
Yeah.
Because the fundamental tenet of blockchain, or the value of Bitcoin, is that everybody agrees that Bitcoin is accurate. Blockchain is
And it
accurate.
prevents double spending.
And if there's double spending, then that means that everybody's currency, while you have it, is now only worth the flash drive that it's sitting on, right? That's the most important.
That's the biggest thing. People are worried about, like, well, Russians can hack this whole thing, and they're just going to spend the entire wealth of Russia to hack Bitcoin because the value of Bitcoin is, I forget what I have it at, a few hundred million or billion right now. I don't know. I have it on chart. But soon it'll be, if it goes back to that $20,000 level and wherever it's, you get close to $1 trillion level, it's worth it for Russia to try to hack it. But by then, it becomes more and more impossible because now there's more miners on there. It would just be impossible to spend enough money to make an effect on all these computers and all these blocks, and to do it quick enough, and to.
I'm sure we'll cover it in a second. You may want to define miners, right? So like, why do these 11,000 nodes? Why are they motivated to actually validate transactions?
So that's why I was trying not to go too much into miners because Jeff is much more knowledgeable about this because he actually mines. So with all that, I had it back here. So the blockchain is transparent, immutable, verifiable. That's why this is amazing, and unhackable because of all three.
You keep referring to the blockchain. Is it singular?
No. So right now, in general, I'm talking about public blockchains, kind of specifically about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's the one with the history. Bitcoin's the one that's been around since 2009.
It's the Rose Bowl, the granddaddy of them all.
Yeah.
This is the largest blockchain.
So that's the largest one. That's what kind of a lot of people are on. Ethereum is one. You've heard of Ethereum. Ether is the coin for Ethereum, the token for Ethereum, and there's other ones. There's Hyperledger.
Because it's a distributed ledger, you could start your own blockchain. Anybody can start their own blockchain.
And companies do. Like Amazon is going to have theirs. They're all the companies, and those are private blockchains. There's a consortium.
Blockchain Ether's the coin that rides on that part.
Yeah. And like there's a consortium of banks. There's a consortium in the shipping industry. There's consortium everywhere. But of banks, for instance, like the sixth or seventh largest Wall Street banks got together and created a blockchain project in which they did global interbank transfers between each other, in between like one bank to another and stuff.
Is it a one-to-one relationship though between the coin and the blockchain? Or
The blockchain is a technology. Then you can have hundreds of millions of coins
on the same blockchain?
on one blockchain, yeah.
I think the simplest way, I think the most concise way to understand blockchain, aside from the technology side, is to think of it as a chain of custody. Right? So think of a crime scene. Right? So it's a piece of evidence that a police officer finds, bags that piece of evidence, and they have to sign their name. Officer Jerry found this particular piece of evidence. And now, Jerry has to give that evidence over to George. And George is going to pass it on to Elaine and onto Kramer, until eventually it gets to some sort of vault, right, at the police precinct. And each time that piece of evidence is given from one officer or sitcom star to the next, there has to be a signature. So the verification process is, imagine if every single time Jerry passes the piece of evidence over to George and so forth, so on and so forth, each time that signature happens, it's like 1,000 witnesses, each witnessing the transfer, the chain of custody transfer, making it like not impossible, but so freaking hard to fake that. That is essentially, if I was going to describe blockchain, that would be the most concise way to explain it. And so there's a chain of custody concept for evidence, and similarly there's a chain of custody concept for verifying financial transactions. But one iteration of that is cryptocurrencies.
But to answer your question,
Hold on a second. But what you're really describing in the simplest terms, it's just an infrastructure. That's what we're talking. It's to secure distributed data, what the internet was to an ability to transfer data between different nodes. It's just an infrastructure which allows you to build things on top of it using the underlying technology, which is itself not all that new. It's a combination of public and private key encryption and obviously a distributed database. That's really what it is in essence, and then you program on top of that, make the applications that Mark has been talking about. So, when you apply this in a business context or in a currency context, you are simply using the infrastructure to track the data. As Joshua pointed out, it has a higher level of security because the effort it takes to break into one computer is not that hard. From a time and a energy usage and processing power, it's not that hard. 2, it's somewhat harder. 3, it gets to an exponential point. I was reading about this last week. The cost to mine one coin is something like the energy it takes to power 1.5 houses for, I think it was either for a day or a month, or something to that effect. And so if you imagine that the cost of buying equipment, having the person sit in front of the equipment, having the energy to power the equipment, and now say we want to do that across 11,000 computers to get 1 bit of data out of it, that becomes very prohibitive. And that's really, I think, what Joshua was explaining. But at the end of the day, it's an infrastructure.
Right.
But
So,
I just want to make
we'll
sure
get-
we answer his specific question. You can have a blockchain with a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, but you can have a blockchain that does not have a currency associated with it, because the blockchain is simply a ledger. Or you can have a blockchain like Ethereum that has multiple currencies using that platform to run their operations as a currency. So it's not particularly that you have to have a one-to-one, a currency to a blockchain. You can have multiple different variations.
I think
Alright,
it's
so
hard
let's-
to use this term
alright.
blockchain
Yeah.
so broadly.
Yeah.
And there's so many different applications.
So I want to
It's the same as the internet.
extend your answer a little bit.
Alright, and then we'll get to you.
It's not just about cryptocurrency or what you can almost think about because it is a ledger, like essentially people you would think about in your common business scenario, like it could be your order or it could be an invoice, it could be anything. So currency is one type of data on the distribution. But that's where the business applications are there because you could just use for, and that's what makes it interesting because if you're a pharmaceutical company, you want to make sure that it's specifically the ERP company or whatever the nature of the business. Now you have the new technology to make it transparent and you can verify it or whatever is happening in products or how the benefits.
Okay.
If you think about
Hold on.
it, a perfect business case for blockchain technology is title agencies, right? So when you want to buy a house, you have to go pay a title agent to verify the ownership. It has the ownership of that house, right? If we had a blockchain that was used that could validate the past ownership of houses, you actually wouldn't need a title agent to do that. You would just go on this blockchain. We use the term blockchain. It's just a distributed ledger. A blockchain is
So
inside.
you go into the application that verifies
That verifies. Another one is, one of the most stolen things on the planet is art, right? So what if all of the art that existed was tracked, with the ownership of art that exists was tracked on a blockchain? That would disrupt that industry, or that would probably actually, bring that industry forward versus the title industry, which may be disrupted. We talk about Bitcoin because it's the first use case.
Yeah.
It was the first thing that validated it conceptually that blockchain and distributed ledger technology work. But in the future, probably many more use cases that are not tokens or currencies.
And we'll talk about this in the panel, but the title is a good instance, and since there's places obviously like we were saying with even with the coins. Here it's irrelevant about whether it's a currency or not, but Venezuela it's very important. In Africa, where there's villages that they don't even have, it's not like they have land surveys and things like that and all. As people are starting to sell property in let's say Africa, like the village leader and then has to have a sign off on the survey of the land and the title, and then also the actual official government of the area. And so title insurance, or not insurance, but title deed recording is starting to become very important in developed or undeveloped parts of the world.
It's actually happening in Sweden right now. They're working on putting their entire registry.
What's up?
Yeah, so this is more of a question, it's more technical in nature. So let's say we have a transaction that's added to a block. The block is fingerprinted and then put back onto the chain. At which point and how far back do you verify the predecessor transactions?
All the way.
So that means that every transaction increases the time and energy it takes to generate a valid block in that chain. Right? It's a
difficult through the process of putting a block onto the chain. It's difficult to figure out what the number is that allows a miner to be the one of those 12,000 people. For that miner to find that number, it's very difficult, at least for a computer. It takes 10 minutes, about. And it gets put on there. But it's very easy, the way that the system works, it's very easy to verify. So the verification is easy. Now I get it, when there's millions of blocks, it makes it harder, but that's what the whole, we're not quite there yet. Where there's ways to put a lot of information outside of the blockchain, information that isn't quite as important or needs to be secure. It's called a lightning chain and side chains and things like that. So that goes beyond what we'll talk about right now. We can maybe get it into a panel.
For the
Yeah, there's ways to speed up. We're looking for that as an industry. We're looking for to improve the infrastructure. When he built it, obviously there was no computers on the Bitcoin network, and it was like just you want to be able to find this number every 10 minutes. So as more computers get put onto the network, it makes it increasingly difficult to find that number. When there's two, it's kind of easy to find the number. When there's 12,000 computers, it's very hard to find the number, because with 12,000 computers looking for it, they'll find it easy. So they increase the difficulty every time, and then they also decrease the rewards of Bitcoin every 4 years, because they want to make Bitcoin last. There's only going to be 21 million that are ever mined, and
it all really depends upon the design of your blockchain. Okay, Bitcoin by design publishes on average a new block every 10 minutes. There's a specific reason and a purpose and code that controls that for a specific reason. Another platform that launched in June called EOS is a completely different design. They're publishing blocks every half a second. So you can design it any way you want, but it all depends upon how you want your blockchain to work and how you want to design all of the parameters around. But the strict, pure blockchain Bitcoin case is a 10-minute block production time, which stays at 10 minutes because it's adjusted by the code every 2 weeks.
Which is why Bitcoin is, in my opinion, isn't quite going to be the currency of the future, but something similar to it will be, and it's still the grand.
That's how it secures the network.
It's a granddaddy of them all, and it'll probably be around for a long time.
So is it because every transaction is being encrypted and making the whole block encrypted? Is that why it's saying that?
Say that again? Did you hear?
No, he was asking why. Is it because every transaction is being encrypted? Is that why it takes 10 minutes? The reason it takes 10 minutes is because by design, the network wants a block to be produced every 10 minutes for security reasons, and that's a whole different discussion. But that gets adjusted by the solution to this mathematical problem being made easier or more difficult as more power is added to the network. Because as you add more power to the network to solve the problem, you'll solve it faster. And sometimes you'll publish a block in 30 seconds or a minute. The average is 10. Sometimes that block they publish and it's empty, it has no transaction in it. But
All right, we gotta get through it. All right, so it's transparent, immutable, verifiable, somewhat unhackable. The blockchain makes data trustworthy, and this is the important thing because it's not just financial transactions, like Vishal said. It's not just coins. It's all sorts of information, healthcare records, or governance, or title records. We want to make data trustworthy if human beings cannot be, when they cannot be, and because they cannot be. Because as you know, pretty much like when you start transacting with strangers, the data, there's always questions on whether the data is trustworthy. This is a book I just wanted to point out that's really good. I read this about, it's really the business aspects of blockchain from a trust perspective. It talks about the history of trust and the different industries that blockchain can really make a big impact on. And he's actually, Richie Atwaro's just created, he actually just put out an app today. He is creating he's creating the ability, he calls data property instead of, it's not a privacy issue, it's a property issue. And he wants to claim all of our data as property so that when it gets, you know, all your data, by the way, gets sold. Your medical records, whether you want it done or not, as you probably know, your medical records are being sold 500 times and people are making thousands and millions of dollars on it. He wants you to be able to say, no, you're not allowed to take my data, or yes, you can, and if you do, I want to share in on that money. And taking your data should be as egregious as if somebody stole your car or stole your house. So he wants to call it property and not data as a privacy right. It's a property right. So
it's actually really interesting. He's been invited to speak at the UN in November as the 31st human right. And basically, it's really about the self-capitalized individual. It's really about the self-capitalized individual. As right now, and historically, we've needed intermediaries to collect all of that data, gather it, and be able to analyze it. But with the power of the blockchain, every individual can decide the extent to which their own data, whether it's financial, healthcare, consumer preferences, get placed on the blockchain and decide whether and to what extent it's sold. And so, you know, we happen to represent that company, so I'm very familiar with it. The fact of the matter is that this represents an alternative way for all of us to monetize things that we own. You know, right now we live in a wage, labor-based economy. But anybody who's looking around at what technologies exist know that that's rapidly transforming. And we don't know what kind of jobs are going to exist 10, 15, 20 years from now. And the blockchain, in addition to all these business uses we're talking about, the blockchain represents power for us to have alternative sources of revenue when jobs don't exist anymore. Really fascinating.
Yeah.
And Richie and team are going to be at the UN in November to have this declared the 31st human right.
Yep. So that book is great. I gotta buzz through a bunch of things because we kind of got into some panel discussion already, but I want to buzz so we could get a bunch of things in. This right here, this was a great article, and by the way, I'll pass this PowerPoint around through Tom and Andrea, and they can pass it to anybody that came today to get some of these things. But there's essentially the protocol level is the blockchain, is the actual blockchain technology. Then there's development languages, compilers on top of it. There's some things like Solidity, which is Ethereum if you want to write some smart contracts. And then the product. So when you talk about Bitcoin, you're not talking, you know, a lot of times when you talk about Bitcoin, you're not talking about Bitcoin the blockchain, you're talking about Bitcoin the thing. Ether versus Ethereum. smart contracts, crypto. Anybody own a CryptoKitty? Or heard about it? No? So CryptoKitties, and there's like Dropbox for blockchain, things like that. There's different names. But the things that you will probably hear about in the future were pretty much the products, but know that the blockchain is kind of on this bottom level, right? So really quick, let me talk about how it all came about. In the 70s, cryptography was pretty much practiced in secret by military. This is a great movie, by the way. The Imitation Game. Please see it. It's so awesome. Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web in 1991. And hypertext links. Then in 1992, the cypherpunks mailing list came about. Tim May, Eric Hughes, and John Gilmore. Those three are important. They created the cypherpunks in 1992, and then in the 90s, the rise of the cypherpunks, not cyberpunks. And Satoshi Nakamoto, who created Bitcoin, we actually don't know who that is. It's just a pseudonym. Hal Finney, he was the one that received the first Bitcoin. Nick Szabo was the one. He's the one that people actually think is Satoshi Nakamoto. There's Julian Assange from WikiLeaks. All these guys and so many others were in the cypherpunks. It was just this mailing list, and they would talk about kind of some privacy issues and anarchist stuff. And then around that time, they also created digital cash. So I remember I was working with a company that transacted with Beans. Beans wasn't my company, but we were using them. And then DigiCash was a big digital cash. You might have heard of some of these, like Flues kind of got big. Beans was a little bit. So they were creating digital cash type of things. They wanted to do it once the internet proliferated, right? And then three important documents came out. David Chaum in 1985 wrote Security Without Identification, which talked about anonymous digital cash. Tim May, this is a big one, wrote the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto, which talked about the irony of central authorities letting individuals be private and free. And the interesting thing about him is he talked about something like the Silk Road. Has anybody heard about the Silk Road? So the Silk Road was a site where essentially sex, drugs, and guns were transacted, and all sorts of bad things. Some good things too, but mostly he went on Silk Road to find some drugs. So he didn't know what the Silk Road was because it wasn't created, but he foresaw something like the Silk Road happening, and that government would use the nefarious purposes of the Silk Road to essentially get rid of any kind of digital cash or rein in your freedom and privacy. In 1993, Eric Hughes created the Cypherpunk Manifesto, and one of the things he wrote was that technologies of the past did not allow for the strong privacy, but electronic technologies do. And he talked about social contract is important for privacy. The problem with digital cash before Bitcoin, right? It was all controlled by third-party corporations. So, one guy would create digital cash or Beans. They could just go create more. Okay, they could create more if they wanted, right? There was no proof that there was a double spend problem. You could potentially, if you could hack it, you could spend coins. You could have 10 coins in your wallet and possibly spend them in two places. You could copy digital files, things like that. And there wasn't widespread acceptance and adoption. It could be popular on one website, and that was pretty much it. There was a calm before the bitstorm. After the first internet bubble crashed, what happened? People started feeling really good. Stock market was up. It was super easy to get debt. Everybody was just mortgages, everything. That was super easy. Promise of the internet was starting to be realized. The iPhone, Amazon, Netflix, all that started coming out. But it wasn't completely freedom and privacy that the cypherpunks cared about. Started to take a back seat because of 9/11 and the Patriot Freedom Act. And then digital cash wasn't that important because Venmo, PayPal, and Dwala started coming about. So, regular cash was easy to transact, borderless and things like that. And everybody started feeling good. They didn't really care about all these anarchist, anti-government stuff. But then what happened? Lehman Brothers, this guy, Madoff, right? All this stuff started happening. So in 2008, it's kind of a bad scene, as we all know, the recession, maybe not for everybody, but in general. And then it wasn't a coincidence that in 2008, I mean, at least I feel, a lot of people feel, that, you know, Satoshi Nakamoto reveals his ability to create Bitcoin by releasing this paper in October of 2008, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It was only 8 pages, and it describes the basis for what the invention of Bitcoin is and the discovery of blockchain. I describe blockchain as a discovery because, first of all, it wasn't a new language, it wasn't new technology, it was all built on stuff that already existed. To me, it's such a profound discovery, or a profound invention that will change the way we do business. In 20 years, every business, generally, will probably have some kind of blockchain component or be running on the blockchain or something. At least that's the way I see it. And it's such an amazing discovery, the way that Satoshi Nakamoto came up with this blockchain. So January, he released the first version of Bitcoin and gave Hal Finney 10 Bitcoin. This book, it's another great book by Nathaniel Popper in New York Times. It gives you the whole history from the beginning. It's very much like a Michael Lewis type of book, where it's just, even though it's about history and stuff, it's completely a fascinating read. So what does this all mean for blockchain? Satoshi discovered a process in which he eliminated double spend concern. Remember, that's being able to copy coin files and things like that. Central authority is not controlling. He eliminated central authority controlling the coins. System hacks don't happen. Geographical, political, or national borders are irrelevant. And the need for manipulated fiat currency, right? The US dollar is so manipulated. They print it whenever they want. They double the supply. They do whatever they want. There's very set rules that everybody in the industry knows what Bitcoin is, how much can be mined, how much is available. It's transparent what's available. They can never say like, oh, let's just double it. So it reduced time to clear transactions and fees to transmit value. When I say that, even though it takes 10 minutes, how much time does it take for your bank to clear a transaction, right? It used to take 10 days, now it takes a day, but still, it's like, why is the banks keeping our money like that? So now it's, at least if it's Bitcoin, it's 10 minutes, some of them are seconds. And it added trust and data and transparency. So some of this stuff we're gonna talk about, beyond Bitcoin, we'll talk about in the panels.
My background is in semiconductors. I've been involved in that a long time. I do something kind of strange right now. I'm designing chips for the Chinese market and subsidized by China. It's a weird place to be, but it's a very good gig right now. I got involved in Bitcoin and blockchain, I'd have to say it was about a year ago. I heard about it prior to that, and a year ago I started to read up and got enamored by the technology, I'll have to say. I'm very impressed by it. So I'm going to go over some things that we spoke about here and maybe go into a little bit more detail than you might want to hear, but it'll paint a better picture of what this is kind of about. So before I jump in, I always like to ask my audience, does anybody have any type of cryptocurrency? Does anybody have a wallet, Bitcoin, or anything? Okay, this gives me a great idea of where you guys stand. Are there any computer science folks in the audience? Okay, excellent. Okay, so you keep me honest. It's good. It's very good. All right, so mining is kind of a quirky term, but highly necessary, okay? Here's my disclaimer. This is not financial advice, it's just a guy talking about crypto, all right? I have to let you know. So some of the things I want to talk about, what is mining? Why mine? What's the purpose? We kind of went over decentralization, but I'm going to hit on it because it's a very big part of this, okay? SHA 256, that's the crypto in crypto economy or however you want to pronounce it. Proof of work, proof of stake, these are security portions of it. ASIC mining, GPU mining, these are the different bits of hardware that we use to get this stuff done, okay? Pools, we'll talk a little bit about pools, block validation rules, block rewards. Try not to get into too much detail here. If anybody has questions as I go along, just interrupt me, raise your hand, whatever. I'd like it to be interactive if that helps. Okay, so what is mining? We talked a little bit about it, but it's essentially verifying blocks on a blockchain. Okay, it's really the important part of the blockchain. We talked a little bit about, what the blocks are. The blockchain, we have consecutive blocks that keep getting added and get verified. It's a process that I became interested in because I'm a hardware person, and I discovered these computers. What is this? What are these things that do this mining? And it started out with just regular PCs, and that was done by design, and then it went to GPUs, and then this thing called ASICs that we'll talk about a little bit. But it got very complicated as I started to investigate and learn more and more about it. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn about it. And it just kind of took me down this path that I am now. And I mine as a hobbyist, okay? More to learn about the process and understand it. But, okay, let me get back to my presentation. Mining consumes electricity and it generates heat. Each block, as we said, takes about 10 minutes, and that is self-regulated, and that's done by design. That's part of the software. Ignore the bottom ones because that has to do with pools. This is a map of our planet and where a lot of the concentration of mining happens. Okay, we've already heard from folks that there's a lot of mining going on in China. It's very true. And they have this map set up based on power consumptions in megawatts. Okay, now this is fairly current, but the thing you'll get at this is there's a lot going on in China. Okay, Europe has a certain amount going on, Iceland, Estonia, East Europe. But there's essentially mining going on pretty much all over the planet. So why mine? Well, to secure the blockchain and to feel good about it, and of course for economical reasons. Okay. Satoshi Nakamoto, by design, built this curve here, all right? Started out with a 50 Bitcoin per block reward to miners. It's a pretty good incentive, except the value was kind of low at that time. And then every certain number of years, it gets halved. So in 2017, it got halved to 12.5 Bitcoins. Okay, that was the reward per block for solving a block. 2021, it's going to be 6.5. And you can see that it keeps halving until it gets out to, I think the year is 2140. There'll be no more Bitcoins to be mined. Now, there still will be an incentive to mine Bitcoin, but you won't get block rewards like these Bitcoin numbers. What will happen, well, we don't know. We don't know if it'll be around then, but ideally, there will be fees paid for doing that type of mining. So back to the concept of decentralization. This is a very big part of this. And it's what, in my opinion, gives it value. You've got, as Mark mentioned, there's 10,000 nodes across the planet that mediate these blockchains, okay? 10,000 nodes, but not 10,000 miners. I have no idea how many miners. There's probably hundreds of thousands of miners that are communicating with these 10,000 nodes all the time, 24/7, 365, okay? There's no single point of failure with this blockchain. Now, I'm talking exclusively about Bitcoin. I have to make that clear right up front. There's a number of different types of blockchains, cryptocurrencies. I fall into that category of Bitcoin maximalist because I focus just on Bitcoin. I have most of my faith in Bitcoin for the reason it's been in existence, living in the wild for 9+ years. And that pulse has been beating 24/7, and it hasn't failed. We're not so sure about the other cryptocurrencies yet. So they have things to prove. So if one of those 10,000 nodes fails at one point, let's say a country says you can't do this anymore, and they shut down all the nodes in Venezuela, it's not going to hurt the blockchain. It's just going to be a step back. It's going to slow down things for a little bit, but it's going to catch up. So, oh, sorry, yeah. Let me jump forward here, and this is the same slide that Mark had, the BTC node world map, and this changes. This is something that things come online. Mark's was like around 11,000, and that was in February or March or something, right? And it changes all the time, and as the price of Bitcoin goes up and down, so does the enthusiasm, okay? And these numbers change. But still, I mean, everywhere you find these nodes, which, again, that's a big part of it, the decentralization. So block validation rules and nodes. Each node runs a base of software that does all of this validation, okay? Nodes, they kind of govern and manage all of the miners that are connected, and they have a certain amount of authority. And they do not mine the nodes. The nodes only do that governing. So we often hear things in the news about what it costs to mine a Bitcoin. This is what I thought a pretty cool map that gives you an idea of what it costs to mine a Bitcoin. Now you'll see Germany is at like 14,000 Bitcoin to mine one Bitcoin. Bitcoin right now is at like 6,400. Not too practical. Go down to Venezuela, $531 to mine one Bitcoin. That's very practical, although they've got a lot of political restrictions about mining. I just read something that Iran now beat them, and it's like $200 to $300 to mine one Bitcoin. It's really an arbitrage of electricity, and your costs of electricity are your most important variables. Electricity, and it's also temperature, because these things generate a lot of heat, and cool climates work well, and cheap electricity. So if you're near a hydroelectric plant, okay, we've read about all of those, and other cheap sources of electricity. So this is just kind of a rough idea of some of the costs. Yeah, these are really big numbers. These are billion, right? $6 billion a year to mine Bitcoin. It sounds a little ridiculous, but when we put it into perspective of what Visa and MasterCard and all these huge servers that they have to do all this, their costs are pretty damn high too. So I don't really get stressed by people saying that it's expensive to mine Bitcoin. Proof of work or proof of stake, we've heard these, we've seen these acronyms, or we've heard these phrases before, and proof of stake is a method to secure a network that Ethereum is actually leaning towards. They're going to try and implement this soon, whereby miners will actually hold coins, hold value, to keep them honest. Perform these, validations of transactions, and if they play by the rules, they keep their coins. It hasn't really been put into play yet, so we're not sure, where it's going to go. It's going to be interesting to see. Proof of work is the traditional miners, and it's, here's some good explanations here. It's a core function to add security to the blockchain, and it's the real reason. When you have 100,000 miners burning all those megawatts that I showed you before, if you wanted to do something nefarious to that network, you'd have to put the money out for all that electricity to buy them to do that. The economics don't allow you to do that, so it's why it's, it is what it is. And requiring advanced hardware and electricity. Well, the electricity is by design, not so much the hardware. The hardware was the progression through time. I'll talk about that. And you've probably heard this thing called a nonce. It's just a number that is put inside of the algorithm, and you have to solve for it. And when you solve for it, it's like bingo, you got it. You announce out to the network, and you get the block, you get the reward. So this is the thing that people try and solve for. And as I said, it's been proven successful for a long time. No. SHA-256 is this, it's the crypto part of cryptocurrency. And I don't want to get into too much detail, but I'll try and explain it so you have a good understanding of it. SHA-256 is just, as this gentleman said, it's an encryption signature. It's really all it is a signature. You take a word. This is one way to explain it. You type a word into a computer, hello world. You run this encryption on it, and it spits out this 64-character, ugly, you don't even know what it is, it doesn't read. Now, if you take the D off of the hello world and you run it again, it gives you something completely different. Okay, now put that D back on, and it's the same one that you had prior. It's called a determinant system. It always gives you the same thing with the same input. Okay? Now, that's just hello world. You could put in the whole book of World and Peace and still get just a 64-bit string, which that blows my mind that you can do something like that. It's not limited to the file size, which is crazy, right, if you think about it. So that's the security that keeps this whole thing honest. And as we spoke about, as a block gets built, SHA-256 is run on that block. We add it to the chain. Now, they then again run that same SHA-256 on that block, that block, that block, and that block, and that creates a whole nother string of security. So as we said, if you changed anything along that chain, we'll know about it. So it keeps it honest. It's a way of policing. The software polices this whole system. It's pretty impressive stuff. Blockchain difficulty, okay. There's a lot of miners out there, and the count of miners keeps increasing. A lot of folks are showing interest in mining, okay. As you throw more horsepower at this effort, naturally you're going to solve this problem faster. So by design, as we spoke, they create a difficulty factor that's built into the software that just makes it harder to solve. So you add more computers, okay, we got to make it harder, even harder to solve. And that's what this difficulty does. I don't like the difficulty because every time the difficulty goes up, it means there's more miners. We have to spread the Bitcoin winnings out more, and I make less. So occasionally you see how it just goes up and up and up. Sometimes things go wrong and it goes down. Well, at this time, there was a flood in China, and a major mine got flooded, okay? You might have seen things on the internet where they had all these mining machines spread out across the lawns trying to dry these things out after a flood. So the horsepower changed right there. What is an ASIC? What is a GPU? These are just acronyms for the hardware that we use to get the job done. Okay, it all started with just a regular PC and a laptop. Some guy got smart and said, I think I can do this better with the GPU. That's a graphics card. You've heard of graphics card GPUs. And he developed the system to do it with the GPU. And all of a sudden, for a couple of months, he was getting all the Bitcoin because he had more processing power than the next guy. Well, somebody got even smarter and said, let's do this with an ASIC. Now, an ASIC is just a custom designed specialty piece of hardware chip. It only does one thing, SHA-256, okay? It's highly dedicated. It's optimized to just do that one function. But when they went from GPU to ASICs, you could no longer mine with GPUs because they just became obsolete and they just couldn't keep up. So now everything is done with ASICs. ASIC seems to be the most common. Pools. If I was to try and mine myself for Bitcoin with my machines, it would probably take me about 700 years to get a Bitcoin, so it's not practical. So I'm not going to do that. So what we do is we join pools, and it's a divide and conquer. So you try and pick out a pool that's got a lot of horsepower or that pays out and is successful, and that's kind of how we get the job done. And it just puts all your hashing power together. And I have a picture here. These are the common pools that are out there. Okay, most of these are in China or Russia. I belong to this one, Ant Pool. This is Bitmain. You've probably heard of Bitmain. Yes?
Real quick, it seems to me that if there's a significant number of pools competing for the same solution, it's not very efficient. So is there a strategy?
Fair? You're thinking not very fair or not very efficient?
Efficient. So is there a way to divide it so that, are they all competing to get the same answer? Whoever gets it first wins, or are they working together?
In a pool,
Outside the pool. So
no,
all right,
let me explain it from the inside the pool. From inside this pool, all of us are working together. We're competing against every other pool. Okay.
There's no strategy to sort of divide the effort so everybody works towards a different solution rather than wasting all that energy on the same problem?
Maybe I can help answer that.
Yeah.
So, to publish, it's like a lottery. To publish the blog,
Good word.
you win the lottery because you're the one person or the one computer that gets the answer.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one. So, in order to get that, you have to run this hash algorithm. You got to compute this over and over and over to get the answer. What happens with the pools is by adding processing, when you run the pool, right, there is software that helps figure out how can we optimize as a pool to make this work.
Great, that part I understand.
And so, but you can move from pool to pool. You can take your processing power, move it from one pool to another pool, but everybody is all trying to solve for that same one number.
And is that by design?
That's by design.
And if you happen to be in the pool that solves it, you're going to share it with everybody that's in your pool, because the fact that you've got more processing power than somebody else means the probability is you may win more. You're obviously going to win more often than if you did it on your own, but you'll win less often than somebody who's got more processing power in a larger pool.
So would we move things along faster if there were multiple nonces that you can choose to solve for, so you have parallel processing taking place?
Well,
Some of this is supposed to be hard because this process needs to be difficult so that you can't hack it.
by
If
design,
you're making it
Yeah.
easier, then it becomes more hackable.
remember I
That's
said,
the engineer in me trying to make things easier.
well, remember I said earlier
not
that
supposed to be.
by design, if you design a different process and a different protocol for a different type of blockchain, you can change all of those types of parameters. But the Bitcoin is one answer, average every 10 minutes a block gets published.
And in theory, it's designed, you want competition in the mining process. You don't want to eliminate competition in the mining process, because that actually destabilizes the blockchain if there's less competition in a proof of work scenario versus a proof of stake.
So, yeah, let me just step back a minute. As there was a progression in miners, and you went from GPUs to ASICs, okay, there was an occasion early this year where Bitmain, the company that owns the Antpool and the Antminers, probably the most used miners, they built a miner, I can't remember the name of it, but it was for Siacoin. Okay, this is just as an example. Siacoin is a method of putting storage, out and doing a share of storage. Siacoin miners were available in short supply. People who got a miner for Siacoin were making a few $1,000s a day because they had no competition, okay? And it's just kind of the way these things work. If you're the first one to jump aboard a technology before it becomes, spread out, there are certain advantages. So when we talk about horsepower that any pool might have, this is the Ant pool, one of the more popular ones. This is how we, speak. We speak in petahash. Peta is 15 zeros. It's a big number. It's a really big number, okay? And this is the amount of horsepower that this particular pool has. Trying to solve for that nonce every 10 minutes, okay? Now, it fluctuates because miners come and go, online as things are being solved. But just to give you an idea of how ridiculously large these numbers and dedicated these things are, okay? CPUs used to do kilohashes, 1,000 processes per second. Well, that's when CPUs went to GPUs at the gigahash level, and then it went to terahash. Terahash is an obscene number, okay, 12 zeros, and that's where we are with ASICs. These things, like I said, are highly dedicated, and they're only good at one thing, and it's solving these cryptographic hash functions. Now, a pool is measured in petahash. That's 15 zeros. So this is how, they rank themselves, mostly in marketing materials to try and, get folks to come aboard, because they like to create the illusion that a lot of horsepower is going to be a better win for the pool. Not always the case, though. This is just a typical machine. These prices are now down at like, $400 or $500. Each one will do 14 terahash. There's another one here, Avalon, Dragon Mint. These machines, to get an idea of how these things operate, everybody's got a hairdryer. Hairdryer's 1,200 watts, right? Noisy as hell. Imagine taking one of these, putting it in your bathroom, plugging it in, and just leaving it. What's going to happen with that bathroom in like a half an hour? You can open the door, you're going to go, whoa. Well, each one of these machines exhibits that kind of heat. They're about the same wattage. Somewhere's in here, 2,000 watts, 1,200 watts. And they burn a lot of electricity. Okay, now take 100 of these and put them in a barn. Take 400 of these and put them in a little warehouse, you've got a lot of electricity, you've got a lot of heat, you've got a lot of noise. So you got to mitigate that, pretty much all the time. These things are running 24/7. So mining economics, naturally the profits fluctuate with the market. When Bitcoin is where it is right now, and I'd have to say in this general geography, North America, United States, the break-even point is around 7,000 for a Bitcoin. If it's anything less, you're not really, making any money. Although you are accumulating Bitcoin, if you hold that Bitcoin until next year when things get better, things will change. The mining machines that are coming out, they're all very competitive. Most of them come from China. You can buy them directly in China, and that's what a lot of folks do. And you have to buy them with Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. You'll buy them, and it's the cool thing about it. Now, if I wanted to buy these with American dollars, it might take a few days before the money gets there. Things clear through whatever. I send my Bitcoin, and in 20 minutes I've got validation. They received it, and the other crazy thing is you get these things in 3 to 4 days here in the U.S., which also blows my mind that I can have these machines come from China that quickly. You have customs fees that you have to deal with. These miners' lifespans are anywhere from 2 to 5 years, which is pretty good considering that they are, running 24/7. It's pretty amazing. Expert level to operate these types of things. They're really pretty easy. They're very easy. It's easy to plug them in. There's firmware that boot up and look for networks. Finds networks. It'll find the network automatically if you don't want to change which pool you're at. So it's highly optimized for anybody to pick these up at Amazon or eBay. It's crazy. So I think that's it for me. Thank you. If you have questions, you want to do a deeper dive, you can always look me up. I'm going to leave some business cards if you want to get some more details. I do a workshop that's it's about 3 hours. And it's really a turnkey mining operation. If you want to throw some of these in the basement, you want to put some in a back shed of your house or something. And it doesn't sound like anything right now. When BTC hits 15,000 or 18,000, it becomes very economical. So thank you. Appreciate it.
But first, we're going to have Kurt Olander, who's founder managing partner of Olander Feldman. Come up, take a table. Olander Feldman's a full services law firm in New York and New Jersey, advises clients on regional, national, and international issues. He specializes in corporate law, advises in every industry on business strategic issues, financial management, growth strategy, asset maximization, turnaround, restructuring. He represents companies in all facets of business life. Capital raising, mergers and acquisitions, intellectual property. He does it all. Data privacy.
Original member of Wellcomes.
Chris DeMaio. He is a partner with him of the and he focuses on the technology and emerging growth services group. BS and MBA from Rowan University. He works with some of the most well-known and successful technology and emerging growth companies. Beyond accounting, he's a strategic advisor and consultant for M&A and auditing, accounting for complex capital structure, acquisition accounting, capitalized software. A lot of that rules have changed with the tax code, right? The new tax one, capitalization R&D. Exit planning, software selection. He spans a variety of industry verticals: ad tech, e-commerce, ed tech, digital media. He's a 2010 Witham Strength and Client Service Award, Frederick S. Witham Entrepreneurship Award, Witham Strength and Marketing Award, as M&A Advisor 40 under 40. Chris Mata is a co-founder of Pressing Crypto Asset Management. He's an investor, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. He founded Pressing Crypto Asset Management to bring cryptocurrencies to mainstream investors through an institutional passive vehicle. He used to be the vice president at Goldman Sachs, managed over $7 billion in assets for the philanthropy fund and trust company, focused on building diversification plans, illiquid small cap securities, implementing strategic portfolios, due diligence, on asset managers and identified alternative investment opportunities. And that's what led him to recognize the cryptocurrency as an unparalleled portfolio opportunity due to the asset's exponential uncorrelated returns. We have David Sorin, who is my partner in moderating this panel, but he's with a little bit of the format change. He's also going to be a panelist.
Excuse me, passing in front of you.
And that he has a BS in accounting and economics from NYU at JD from Fordham School of Law. Office managing partner of McCarter English, co-chair of the Venture Capital and Emerging Growth Companies practice. He focuses on private and publicly owned startups. He's been repeatedly recognized by well-known periodicals. He brings to bear his broad range of knowledge in diverse emerging growth markets. He covers all the technology industries, software, AI, artificial augmented intelligence, VR, AR, cybersecurity, e-commerce, life sciences, recognized all over by leading publications, New Jersey's top 100 business people, top deal maker, state's top corporate lawyer. He's got it all. And he knows everybody in New Jersey. He's the one who knows everybody in New Jersey and New York.
I'm missing a couple of million people there somewhere, but
Vishal Singh is a CTO and co-founder of Link 3D and Intertech. He has an MS in computer science from Columbia University, 15 years of combined research and software development experience. He co-founded and is a CTO of Link 3D, which harnesses the power of the blockchain to protect users' intellectual property rights for their 3D printing models. So when you send your 3D printing model to China to get manufactured, his software gives you the ability to protect that. He's a co-founder and partner at Incretech, a unique startup as a service company. He helps in de-risking the early stage development and release of MVP software. He's helped me with a number of my projects, with a number of my companies. He has a wonderful mixture of a vast knowledge, obviously, of computer science, but also is able to really hone in on what customers want and what the needs of the business, as opposed to a lot of technologists are, let's just build stuff just to be cool. He has a good mixture of business and customer relations. So, he authored several U.S. patents. Vishal's industry experience, he worked at Cisco, Motorola, and then he's Lindsley Medlin.
My introduction will be shorter. I'm not as impressive as the rest of these guys.
International C-level executive. He's a founder and president of Pitling Strategies. 30 years of experience building and running businesses. He's a certified blockchain professional. Pitling Strategies, he provides full-time fractional and contract COO and consulting services to small and mid-sized businesses. And he's a published author, speaker, and consultant, and he wrote a book, 1 Hour Business Pit Stop, a formula for refueling growth, which you can download for free, really?
Yep.
All right, download for free at www.onehourpitstop.com. Joshua Weiss. In his early 20s, Josh secured over $3 million in institutional funding for his first startup, 1-800 Tow Truck. When was that, 97?
97.
National Roadside, did you get bought out by AAA or?
We got bought out, but it was a closed sale, so.
I mean, I guess.
Not by AAA.
You competed with AAA.
Yes, they were the largest competitor we had.
So, he grew to one of the largest in the industry. And his first mobile app was arguably one of the first ever. It was called Traveler OS SOS, and it was on the Palm 7X. Was that before the Palm Pilot, or?
Actually, you can't even really use the term Palm Pilot. There was a whole lawsuit about that back in '99. But it was the first wireless, it was the first fully wireless Palm device. Before that, you'd have to have a 5X, and you'd have to have this little device that you plug in to make it wireless. Back in 2000.
So he created an app that worked on the Palm. He's the founder and CEO of TeleApp, named 2015 Rising Star Company by NJTC, technology finalist and Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year. And TeleApp has been a repetitive winner of awards from Clutch from 2016 to 18, and he holds several patents and has been quoted in Inc. Magazine, Entrepreneur Magazine, Mashable, Forbes, Time, NBC, CBS, all over. And then Jeff, I'm going to bring up Jeff too. You got a chair here. Cool, if he wants to speak. Jeff, he already gave his background. He's a semiconductor design technologist, and he's been into mining, and he's a key contributor at RCA, Siemens, Mentor Graphics, Cadence, and IBM, and he's done a lot of work with those. So we are going to ask these guys a number of questions. So, so let's start with some of the basics. Even though we covered the basics, I want to talk about, we talk about cryptos, and there's tokens, there's crypto assets, there's also fiat. Does anybody know what fiat means? Right? I didn't really know what it was either until I started getting into crypto. But fiat is essentially the dollars that are run by governments. But let somebody explain it. Chris, do you want to take that? What a fiat is exactly? Because that's let's start with what is in crypto and.
Yeah, I mean I think someone called it out. It's most simply currencies that are managed by governments, and obviously. The impetus for the whole crypto space kind of revolved around some of the concerns around leaving governments to control these currencies. And I think in the US we haven't been as forward thinking about it, just because the governments here have generally, relative to other countries, been pretty good. We don't experience, or we haven't experienced, extreme hyperinflation over the past 20 years. So it wasn't as much of a concern here, but a lot of other countries, people have talked about Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and a ton of others that are experiencing huge levels of hyperinflation, governments that don't actually look out for the best interests of the people in that country. People in those countries have been very focused on this, very focused on the decentralization movement, very focused on cryptocurrencies, which aren't controlled by a government and wouldn't be considered fiat currency.
Right. And it's funny, once you get into the industry and you start talking with people that are really into cryptocurrency, fiat is it's an F word. Everybody, because the governments control it and manipulate it and everything, and we think the panacea if we kind of come across the right kind of coin, it could be the borderless global currency that we hope it to be without manipulation. So
I saw something that referenced the artist 50 Cent, and they said, or if you're in Zimbabwe, it's 12 trillion cent or something like that. But yeah, we look at things through U.S. and Western Europe prism, and people generally have pretty good banking system. But there was a documentary a while back on CNN, and there was somebody in Africa that was pushing a wheelbarrow full of cash to the bank, and the reporter asked him, well, aren't you worried that somebody's going to steal your money? And he said, no, I'm more worried that somebody's going to steal my wheelbarrow because it's worth more than the paper money that he's pushing around in it.
So let's talk about Kurt, you were talking about the difference between, like, we talked about cryptocurrency and tokens. Do you want to talk about that?
Right. Well, I think that jumps a little bit ahead. I mean, I want to make a comment on the last topic we were just talking about. One of the fundamental value premises of cryptos is that it is independent of government. But from a U.S. perspective, if you think about it from your perspective as a consumer, if I said to you, give me $1 and you can buy 1 Bitcoin that's worth $1, but I make no promise as to what it's going to be worth tomorrow, how would that affect your decision making, your willingness to adopt it? If I said it'll be worth 50% more tomorrow, then your willingness goes up. But now let me throw a third hypothetical. I say it's going to be worth 50% more tomorrow, but you can't convert it back to something that you can spend, and I'm not sure anyone's going to accept that crypto for you to exchange it for something else of value. Then your proposition goes a different direction as well. And so when we talk about cryptos, and we'll talk about utility coins in a moment, the value proposition from and some of this reflects my own feeling about it. From a U.S. perspective, I think it's really more of a speculative. It's more something you look at as, well, if you want to play penny stocks in the market, that's another way to speculate on what's going to happen, because we're not hedging against the value of our currency. But if I flip a forward scenario and tell you that the dollar, the US dollar, tomorrow is going to be worth 1 penny, but you could buy this other instrument that is likely to be less unstable than the dollar you're holding, you'll take your chances. And I think that sort of sums it up from a global standpoint. One of the things that we bantered about internally amongst the group is, is cryptocurrency something that, should you buy? Is it something that a business should accept? And, the basic underlying economic concepts apply more strongly to cryptocurrency, where you have supply and demand, where it's not controlled by a government, but by just what someone out there does. I mean, there was recently, I think it was in the news yesterday, it might have been early this morning, I don't remember when it was released, but some crypto whale has moved hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin over the past 24 hours, which is one of the reasons why Bitcoin has gone off. Now, it would be highly unusual to wake up in the morning and read the Wall Street Journal that says somebody just moved trillions of US dollars somewhere, we don't know where, we don't know who, and so your money's now potentially worth a lot less. Last time that happened in dramatic fashion was obviously the crash, back in the 1920s, and there was the run on the banks. So, so when we talk about the value proposition of crypto, you have to take into account where you're sitting. And it's very different from, you brought up tokens a moment ago. Tokens which are not being used for currency purposes, but they're exchangeable for goods or services or for other purposes. In the value proposition, there's security tokens, and then I'm getting ahead, but you want me to keep going or just pause?
All right,
we'll just pause it, because then we're going to go over it.
Can I pop into the question?
Yeah.
So when it comes to speaking about it as currency, I find that interesting because hasn't the federal government declared it as property?
Well, the federal government has, but that's from a tax standpoint.
Correct.
That's not from a what you can do with it standpoint.
Right. That's also a consideration that I think in your scenario should be put out there because of the different tax laws around holding that much property.
Yeah, we're going to touch on that a little bit later. But in simple terms.
Which again is a U.S.-centric problem,
Correct.
not somebody in Central Africa has to worry about.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if I say I'll give you 1 Bitcoin for your car, and you say okay, then what the U.S. government regards it as doesn't really matter.
Right.
It might matter for your tax outcome,
Right.
but it won't matter for the value proposition if you believe that you can then take that Bitcoin and do something else with it.
Right.
So let me ask you, to the panel. You have a company, and you have stock in that company, and you can value that company in several ways. You got book value of the company, and there's this price-to-earning ratio, and all that stuff. And in theory, the stock trades based on whatever arbitrary value you put to that company. And some it's more or less. The CEO can say something stupid in a tank, so it's not necessarily accurate. But Bitcoin specifically, and then we could get to some other cryptocurrencies that are actually run by one company. But Bitcoin isn't run by a company. It's owned by the public. It's not owned. It's out there in the public, and it's just a currency, a global currency. Since nobody owns it, and nobody controls it, and nobody can stop it really, what establishes the value of Bitcoin, and how is that value maintained?
Well, that's an easy one, right? The value of Bitcoin is based on exactly what the value of the U.S. dollar is based on. Absolutely nothing other than what somebody's willing to value it as, right?
Right. And gold.
Yeah, there's no hard asset backing it. It's the same question of, you know, how much would you pay for a Reggie Jackson rookie baseball card, right? Somebody might be willing to pay $100,000 for that. Why? Because that's what they're willing to pay. So when you're talking about value, the value, and because Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer, which means I can deal with somebody directly, the value is what the two of us place on that asset. And in certain parts of the world, people place more value on it. There's a huge arbitrage right now in Iran, because I think yesterday I read that one Bitcoin was selling for like $24,000 in Iran, when on the open market it's trading for $65,000 to $7,000. The reason for that is that people in Iran would much rather have a Bitcoin than Iranian currency, and they place a higher value on it. So, you know, that's really
Chris,
what.
Do you have anything to say? You were shaking your head and everything. Or?
Well, no, I agree. I mean, it's based on the value that one places on the coin itself.
Yeah.
I was going to talk a little bit about tokens, because we've focused a lot on Bitcoin,
Yeah.
which is a really different world than, you know, initial coin offerings or tokens, which I don't know if you're ready to get into that.
Let me get to that in a sec. Just to finish up, you know, a lot of times when I talk about Bitcoin or any of these coins, a lot of people will say, again, it has no value and it can go to zero tomorrow and all this stuff. And I equate it to gold. And that's why I said it's more like a store of value to gold. What value does gold really have other than what people say it has? All gold is a rock that people have said. Now, you could say it has 5,000 years of history. It's got a pretty good history of that with 5,000 years. But gold really is, all it is a rock that we assign value to. And Bitcoin, in my opinion, is really no different.
But you see, what it really is the laws of supply and demand at their most basic.
Right,
It's the rule of scarcity. The only reason why gold has value at all is because there's a finite amount of gold in the world. It is a scarce resource, and if the demand for that resource goes up, the value of gold goes up. If the demand for that resource goes down, the price of gold will go down. It's exactly the same. And that's why Bitcoin has been, and Chris, I'm going to look to you, Bitcoin in so many ways is today's digital gold. And it's a great example of how in the world today we will consider how we have a store of value and a measurement that gold used to be. You know, remember, I don't know how many people here remember, it's before my time as an adult, but the US dollar used to be pegged to gold. It was on the gold standard. And in the early 70s, right? Early 70s, we went off the gold standard, and the value of a dollar is strictly based upon our belief in the stability of that dollar and the laws of supply and demand. And it's exactly, this is an interesting issue, in the United States and in every country that has its own national currency, those countries can have a monetary policy where they can increase or decrease the size of the money supply. And that's a very important aspect of governmental policy, or in our case, Federal Reserve policy, in dealing with inflationary and recessionary pressures. When you have a universal currency or potentially a global currency, we have to ask the question, what does that do to monetary policy? I think it completely diminishes the power of monetary policy. But this is all, we talk about this as though there are new rules. The fact of the matter is there aren't new rules at all. The same old rules apply. We're just applying them to something new.
And gold, and Bitcoin to gold, the comparison, Bitcoin is more portable. I can carry it. I don't even have to carry it. I could just log in and get it, or whatever. It's divisible. I could give you a penny of my Bitcoin. Try doing that with a bar of gold, right? A bar of gold you got to carry around, and then it's not safe. Bitcoin is safe in the sense like I can transfer it and things like that. Bitcoin or gold, if I'm carrying it to go buy something, and really people don't take gold. Like everybody says, gold is great, but I mean, try to go to your buy pizza with gold. First of all, you have to shave off something, and then, and they don't take it. They don't have the ability to take it. Bitcoin, in theory, even though people aren't really taking it yet, it's very easily conceivable that, with a little bit of advance in technology, that people can take it. So, to me, it's a very, very superior goal. But, go ahead.
I just want to go back to the example that was given a minute ago about the Iranian value being such a big arbitrage. Why does that arbitrage exist? Why isn't that pretty instantly diminished with people selling to the Iranians and increasing supply because they can buy it somewhere else?
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say capital controls. I mean, these arbitrages aren't new. South Korea and in Korea, Bitcoin has traded at a premium over the history of Bitcoin generally because there's been more demand there. But the capital controls on these countries make it difficult for, if I wanted to send money and sell Bitcoin in Iran, unless they have US dollars, which they don't, it's going to be difficult for me to get their local currency back to the U.S. So in Korea, for example, I think there's a $50,000 or $50,000 limit on the capital controls that you can send out of the country every year. So that premium has persisted over the history of Bitcoin, and we've seen that happen in other countries like Zimbabwe, like Iran, over periods of time during like really high stress periods. The premiums have gone through the roof.
Globally, ex-US, there's a lot of pressure to make this a tradable currency.
Sure.
A lot more than there is here.
Oh, yeah.
The people are going to make it happen. And that's what's beautiful about it, I think. I mean, this is really a democratized, populist movement. I mean, the people are going to make it happen despite any intervention by the government, and eventually I could see the government will just get into it.
Yeah, a lot of these countries don't have Venmo, they don't have PayPal, they don't have Chase QuickPay, they don't have easy access to bank accounts, so for them it's kind of a no-brainer, especially because you can transfer it digitally and you can carry it with you.
Does anybody know how many unbanked there are? There's at least, I mean, I feel like the number's 2
5
billion.
billion.
But I think it's
Two
like
and a half billion is
unbanked.
generally the number.
that people don't have a bank account. And it's got
That's
to
a
be more
lot.
than that. I mean, it's got to be like half of China, right? And like half of Africa is unbanked. Like, it just seems, I mean, I worked in an organization that tried to help the unbanked of the world get access to money, but I just feel like it's got to be more
Estimates are about 2.5 billion people in the world.
And it's not just limited to other international countries. It's prevalent in the U.S. too, even though it's something that people don't focus on as much because a lot of people don't have that issue. But you see bank accounts, it's kind of a little backwards in that these banks to support really poor people, the economics don't really work out as well, right? Because you have to support bank accounts that have very small balances. So you saw companies like Bank of America increase their minimums for people that aren't maintaining certain balances, which makes it really hard for lower income people to afford bank accounts, and they, as a result, get money orders and all of these
check cashing services.
Yeah, exactly, which they actually pay far more than a wealthy person does for simple banking services, especially as a percentage of their wealth, which makes it difficult for them to even do things like pay rent.
And blockchain's a partial solution to that as well. Because blockchain allows you to get rid of intermediaries like banks, and while you still need banking services, I think you were the one who said this, Mark, while you still need banking services, you may not need banks in the future.
Yep.
You may not need the services.
All right.
What's that?
You may not need the services.
Well, that's a good point.
Certain
The services happen through blockchain usage and blockchain applications.
We're going to get back to the economics of crypto assets and everything, but let's start to define. We talked about crypto assets. What makes a token? Why are tokens crypto assets? Chris, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about conceptually what ICOs are, initial coin offerings and tokens, because I think we focused a lot on the store of value, so to speak, which is kind of the larger, more down the fairway cryptocurrencies. And one of the most popular things that have happened over the last, call it 12 to 18 months, are initial coin offerings. So what's happening is companies are offering their own currencies to the world, and the
Don't
question,
call them currencies.
well, their own tokens to the world. And here's a good analogy, I think, of like why a company might do this, right? So a public pool. So everybody in this room decides that, Bridgewater, New Jersey needs a public pool, and we don't have one right now. So everybody at this table is, myself, Kurt, and everyone on the table, we're gonna create a company, and we're gonna build this public pool, but we don't have any money to do it. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna say, all right, everybody here, we're gonna create a token, and you're gonna give us money for that token. And I'm gonna give you that token. What that token is a pool pass. So we're gonna collect all your money, right, in exchange for the future promise of this token, this pool pass. And now we're gonna take that money and we're gonna build this awesome pool. But we don't actually own the pool. The pool is for everybody, right? This company just builds the pool. And once we build the pool, we give you all the pool passes. Those are the tokens. When you gave us that money, that was the coin offering. That was the initial coin offering, the ICO. You've given us money and we've given you these tokens. And that money that you gave us was the promise for us to produce this thing that has utility in the future that you can use, right? Now what happens is we finish building the public pool and the world can use it. And when we think about speculation in this market though, you guys all have these tokens. You all have these pool passes. And nobody outside of this room, everybody that's in the restaurant over there, they don't have the pool passes. So, you might get up and you might walk out and say, hey guys, I've got this pool pass and this is gonna be a great pool. So I paid $1 for the pool pass. I'll sell it to you for $3. And now everybody outside of this room that wants the pool pass, they're all trading. They're trading for that pass. At the same time, while we're building the pool, we're gonna produce more of these tokens. And we're gonna sell more of those tokens to the world. And maybe we're gonna sell them at a higher value because now we know there's a demand. Then we deliver.
Or you've gotten farther along in building the pool and the value
Yep.
proposition is validated.
The value proposition is validated. Now people are seeing the pools being built, right? And the pool looks fantastic. So now the value proposition is higher, and we're going to issue 1 million more tokens. And now there's 1 million more of them out there, and people are buying them. And now in between you,
Because
you're all
everybody
buying
in
some.
Somerville now says, hey, we want to go to the Bridgewater
We want to go to the
pool.
Bridgewater pool because it's amazing. Now what's interesting about an ICO is this.
And by the way, what you're describing is a utility token, just
Correct.
so everyone knows, which is something that's exchangeable for goods or services.
Well, not before the pool is built.
No, but it will ultimately be exchangeable for the goods
Yes.
and services
But that's-
from
But
the issuer.
The situation you described though is a security token, but it could potentially be a utility. We don't have to get into that anymore.
we don't have, before we get into those nuances, the motivation behind a company.
Right before, really quick, this is what's going on, these conversations going on with the SEC and the US government.
Regulation.
About regulations behind what he's saying, like when do we tax, at what point is it taxable, at what point is it like an investment, all that stuff. So it's a crazy time going on, but go ahead.
Now just to finish the thought, because I think there's some important nuance to this concept of the pool. The company that's building the pool, we don't own the pool.
Well, yeah, that's where
If
we're
it's
gonna
a
get.
company building the pool,
Right.
it's a security, right? There's
Correct.
one central party that the pool's success is dependent on.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in a case like that, and like you said, you're selling it to other people saying this is a great team, they're gonna build a great pool, that's the definition of the security, right? You have a great company building a great product and you're trading something based off the potential value.
Right.
If it's a decentralized group of people that are all contributing to the project and there's not one central party that's controlling the pool, right? That's managing the whole project. There's thousands of different people working on the pool together, and the pool is available when you issue the tokens. That's a utility token. There's actual utility on day one when you have the token, and it's not the success of the pool isn't pegged to the success of a specific.
I try to be extremely simple, right? So in my mind, if you want to define what a token is, who's ever been to Chuck E. Cheese?
Or the subway, yeah.
Right?
The subway, I think.
You go to Chuck E.
Everybody raised their
Cheese, you buy their little coin with the rat on it in order to use their arcade.
Can I just say something before you go through it, because I think a lot of people in this room are in different places. Can we finish the one thought and then debate the
Yeah,
utility token?
I was going to say, we didn't get to the end of the pool.
And I'm freaking lost.
So think of the pool token as a Chuck E.
swim,
Cheese
so
token.
I wanna-
Think
Yeah.
of it as that.
Yeah, no, I actually disagree with that. That the
Okay.
pool token isn't a Chuck E. Cheese token. That's the point. An ICO is a bit of a complicated thing. A Chuck E. Cheese token, right? Chuck E. Cheese owns a business, and they're going to give you a token in exchange for your money, and then you're going to immediately take that token and you're going to do something at Chuck E. Cheese, right? If we just finish the pool analogy, Because the pool actually one day turns into potentially the Ether network, or I guess the Bitcoin network. The idea is that the builders of the pool, the people that are issuing the tokens for the pool, their intention is not to own the pool. Their intention is to give the pool to a network. And now everybody has pool passes to the pool, right? And one day, when that network gets big enough, it's no longer our job to maintain the pool. The pool gets maintained by everybody in the network. All of you guys that have tokens to the pool, you guys are effectively the ones that are ultimately maintaining it. The Chuck E. Cheese token, which is a pure utility token, that is I'm exchanging a US dollar for a thing that then allows me to buy something, right? That's a kind of a pure utility token. You know, and again, I didn't want to get totally into the whole utility versus security, but what these ICOs are trying to do is create networks. They're trying to build community networks that do things. Now, Bitcoin is a community network that does something. Ether is a community network that does something. These companies are trying to take a concept and they're trying to solve a problem. They're trying to build a business, but that business is built based on a network that they're creating. They're not looking to own the network, but what they can do, one of their value propositions is, if they do build a network, they can continue to produce more coins and more tokens that have value, and they can give some of those tokens to themselves, and then they can trade those tokens out on the marketplace like their stock. And that gets into the whole security thing, which I think is a good point. Segue is like, well, is this actually stock, right? And what the SEC is trying to do about that, but.
And the reason why we want to bring this up to you guys is because it does matter if you ever decide to have a business that is exploring, using coins, using blockchain, doing an ICO. There's a lot of issues that matter. You can't, the days of just putting some coins out there and get millions of dollars is kind of gone. There's a lot of regulations around it.
And that's a good thing if you want to have a sustainable marketplace.
Regulation is good. I know it's a bad thing to say in the crypto world, but an appropriate
but it can also
be.
Hold on one second. I think this is so important relative to someone like you, Chris. You know, one of the most exciting things to me is a guy who's been involved representing blockchain companies and working in crypto for about 4 or 5 years is we're passing through that scam period that you see at the birth of almost every industry. This is nothing surprising or new that there were scams in ICOs. But where I take comfort is when I see guys like Chris and his partners who come out of the world of Goldman Sachs and professionalism and financial discipline, who are coming into this marketplace to make it real and make it sustainable and make it something that we can rely on. Right. You can't rely on the ICOs, the tokens or the coins that were issued by people who were trying to get money quickly and thought they could bypass a regulatory scheme. That's crap. And if we want to really talk about what companies benefit from issuing tokens, we can have that discussion. But a tokenization financing strategy isn't for every company. You know, there's the old analysis, if you were a company, you're trying to raise money, what did you think? Do I do debt or do I do equity? Right? I mean, that's the basic question. Today, there's a triumvirate. There are 3 things you think about. Do I do debt, do I do equity, or do I do a tokenization transaction? And tokenization transactions are not for every business, just like doing debt isn't for every business, depending upon what the needs are, or raising equity is not for every business. So you have to think about what the underlying business case is and what the financial model of the company is. But Chris, I encourage you to speak to this because you were the guys who are helping to make this the future and making it real.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a very nuanced thing. You can just see from just the conversation up here. The SEC doesn't even have clear guidelines on this yet. But the bottom line is what Dave described. These ICOs, people saw them as an opportunity to raise money for any idea. I want to start a hot dog stand or a pool, and I'm going to raise millions of dollars for this fancy pool or this hot dog stand. And they were actually doing that, right? And bypassing all regulations. They weren't doing a Reg D offering. They weren't doing a Reg S offering, a Reg A offering. They weren't doing an IPO. And they weren't giving away any equity in their company. They were saying, this token, I promise that you'll be able to use this token for the pool. They would raise all the money, and then they'd walk away with the money, and the pool never came. So really the regulators have started to step in here and say, a lot of what's happening, these are securities. If you're issuing a token like this and it's dependent on me building this pool, that's not okay unless you do it through a securities offering. So a Reg D offering, something that Dave can actually put together for you and you file with the US government to ensure that you're following the appropriate securities laws. There are other situations where there are true utilities where so a team or a decentralized group of people build a product or something online and other people, and then they sell tokens to people that are usable on that platform immediately. So there's instant utility, kind of like a decentralized Chuck E. Cheese, where the pool, you don't have to wait for the pool to be built.
So we're going to take a break after these questions, and then we're going to take a break.
It's a basic question. When you started out with Weiss, that you collected money, and when you started the company, then you gave the tokens in return of that, the money that you raised. Then you were making more tokens. Where does the company get the money to make those more extra tokens to distribute to the world?
Well, I mean,
That's the $64,000 question.
That's kind of a big question we can answer when we come back from break. Really quick?
So I'm thinking of securities when you describe the pool situation. I'm going to issue some to everybody. You're all going to be owners in this thing. Just do the compare and contrast with a coin offering versus a stock offering. I mean, what is different about the two?
Nothing.
Now, nothing.
yeah, in my opinion, nothing.
A year ago,
Nothing. I mean,
there was, because people were doing it.
So then why?
Well, there wasn't a difference a year ago. Hold on a second. There wasn't a
The
difference.
difference is in what the characteristics of the token are. If I do a stock offering and I'm an owner of that company, and now the company does a stock offering, I dilute my ownership, my percentage ownership in the company, and now I have co-owners, true co-owners. If I issue a debt instrument instead, I have an obligation as the company to pay that back. Then you look at the characteristics of the token itself. You know, in my simple mind, tokens are a hybrid security. They have debt characteristics to some extent. Like Chris was saying, I have to let you use the pool. I don't have to pay you money, but I have an obligation to you. And they can also have equity-like elements because some tokens carry with them a revenue share right or a profit share right or, you know, sort of the equivalent of a dividend or an interest rate. So that has equity attributes to it. Debt is security. Debt instruments are securities. Stock instruments are securities. And, you know, the point of these new types of instruments, you call it whatever you want, but the fact of the matter is they have the same sort of underlying economic characteristics to them. And so, you know, we could have called it a spoon, and it would have the same underlying issues that we have to talk about. And your point is, you know, companies can, with shareholder approval, create more stock, more authorized stock, that as long as there's a market for it, they can issue it. In a tokenization transaction, stockholder, if you're an owner of that company, stockholders don't have a say in how many tokens a company issues. So when the board of directors of a company says, I'm going to do a tokenization transaction, that has effectively a dilutive effect on ownership depending upon what the characteristics of the token are. So today, and I'm sure everyone sitting up here has experienced this, when I represent investors today in a company, I have representations and confidence in my transactions that preclude the company from doing a tokenization deal without the investor's approval. If I'm going to be a stockholder in a company, I'm going to be looking for the same kind of protection today. And all of this is evolving. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but all of this is evolving over time. You know, a summer ago, we were talking about the scams. And it's amazing to see 1 year later just how much has happened to improve that market. And, you know, the regulatory environment is still incredibly uncertain. One of you, I think it was you, talked about the fact that there are, you know, some countries are lining up very sort of crypto favorable, others not so much. This is going to be no different than every other time that there were more restrictive regulations somewhere, less restrictive somewhere else. There will be winners and losers, as there always are, and ultimately I believe that we will, I'm going to sound like an anarchist now, I believe we're ultimately going, and I don't know how long this is, we're ultimately going to come to a global currency. Because I believe that the polity has always grown to match economic realities. And we moved from family economies to villages to city-states to nation-states. I believe at some point the nation-state will prove to be no longer relevant because the economy is truly global. And that's the point at which the realities of economics will take over, and it'll make sense to have a global currency or multiple global currencies. You know, Chris talked about, why do you accept the dollar? Because you believe in it. If Amazon tomorrow created Amazonian dollars, I would trust them.
Right.
And that's the whole issue, right? Do you trust it or not? And so I think it's fascinating where this is all going.
All right, on that note, we'll take a 5 to 7 minute break. So we're gonna talk more of the business use cases. We're gonna stay on the tokens just really quickly. I just want to get through some more of the things that we kind of ended with. And I want to get into some of the, I know the hardcore regulations might not be that interesting, but there's a lot of fascinating things that are happening in the crypto economy, internationally, nationally, and what it means. One thing, let's talk about the practical uses for tokens or cryptocurrencies. Talk about, well, first of all, is it a good idea at this point, or maybe 5 years from now, to accept Bitcoin? Does anybody want to take that? Like, is it safe to take? If I accept it, is it going to go down the next day and I lose all the money? It's like, so talk about accepting Bitcoin for my business.
You have to look at it first of all at the level of risk you want to take. But I will say something interesting about this whole movement and this whole cypherpunk into Bitcoin, into blockchain, it is still somewhat of a small community still, and it is a very engaged community. And I have read about coffee shops or small retail stores that have decided to accept Bitcoin, and their business grew 300-400%, simply because there are enough people in this community who want to support the use of those things and want to support those businesses. Now, should you be taking Bitcoin for, $20,000 projects? If they want to pay you in Bitcoin, maybe you should. If you have the ability to convert that Bitcoin because you want to mitigate your risk, you can convert that Bitcoin almost immediately into US dollars on an exchange. So there are use cases where you can do that, but it's all about managing your risk and what you're comfortable with.
I think that the climate is still so volatile with not knowing how things will play out. So Goldman Sachs this morning announced that they are not going to be following through with their crypto trading desk that they had been planning. And so this is big news. And so this is what we would call a negative to cryptocurrency in general, or to the legitimacy of it. And so if I'm a retailer and I want to accept coins, and all of a sudden I find out that a major organization, a major trusted financial organization decided, we're going to put this on hold. The reason that they put it on hold is because it's unclear how the legal and regulatory issues are going to resolve. And so until there's clarity with that, I think that building a cryptocurrency, something like a credit card system that people can just walk into for retailers, for regular retailers like coffee shops, pizza shops, the guys that you'd find on Main Street, I think that it's a risky maneuver. I think, however, if someone were to focus on the gambling industry or other verticals in which people want to remain anonymous, right? So think of the places that people might go that they don't really want any kind of record, or transaction that they were actually there. I think that there might be a better opportunity right now. It kind of unfortunately brings like this seedy underbelly or connection to like cryptocurrency, and it really shouldn't be that way. But there's a difference between people that are trading crypto because they're speculating about what it might be worth in the future, and people that are trading or trying to acquire cryptocurrency because they can actually use it right now. So you spoke earlier about, in Iran and other countries, there's such a premium on it because they can actually use it. But right now, if you have Bitcoin in your wallet, what can you buy? What store are you going to go to? You can't walk into the Apple store right at this moment and buy your MacBook Pro with it. And so I think that until the regulation and the legal stuff gets worked out, I think that it's going to continue to be this up and down. Every other month there's some new positive information, and all of a sudden there's a big negative piece of information.
I think what we're seeing is, right now the infrastructure has to be built out. And not only that, it's like the very early days of the internet. Remember when people, I know my aunt called me, she's like, never put the credit card on the internet, right? And now everybody, they don't even think about it, puts the credit card on the internet. The infrastructure has to be built out, security. More importantly, people never talk about this, the user experience has to be built out. It's really hard. It's kind of easy to buy Bitcoin. Other than that, all the other ones, very difficult, almost impossible for like a novice to do it. And so the user experience, like at a business, if you guys are going to take business, there has to be something where it's so easy that your employees can easily do that. But that's coming. That's what these ICOs were kind of doing there. The infrastructure was being built out, and that's kind of all the what was happening.
Well, didn't this go back to what David said about trust? I mean, we've got an entire town in Manchester, New Hampshire, that Main Street is running on Bitcoin. And like Bitcoin ATMs, and people are driving from other states to secure a wallet. So it is happening, but wouldn't it come down to whether you're going to trust this or not, and who's going to be those first people to run with it?
Sir, and even in that town, it's got to be early adopters that are doing it, right? I mean, I can't imagine everybody's doing it. Trust is a huge component of this, just as a new technology. But that's the beautiful part of the blockchain is it's all about trust, transparency. You're able to trust the data and trust the transactions because humans can't be. So it's certainly a good point.
Yeah, let me just, Scott, and then I'll grab you. It's actually a little bit more subtle than that. I mean, if you look at the two hallmarks of currency, put aside durability, as a third, and there's a few others. It's got to be readily exchangeable, and it's got to be price stable. And so, and the exchange portion of it incorporates trust, but not trust from a security standpoint. Your Bitcoin might be extremely secure, but if nobody wants it, the fact that it's locked in the safe is irrelevant. So, for the user experience, certainly part of it, that facilitates the exchange, but ultimately, the biggest impediment to this being widely adopted, certainly in this country right now, is that, as Lindsley, as you quipped, the coffee house could take the Bitcoin and immediately change it for US dollars. That means you want to get out of it as fast as possible so you can get into a currency that is readily exchangeable and is price stable, because your concern would be right now, since the laws of supply and demand, basic economics, affect cryptocurrency far differently than they affect a government-backed security, where the government, albeit artificially, if you trust the government, at least, and we can say this from the U.S. and Western countries, is looking out for the general welfare of its occupants, of its citizens, and of the overall economy, then it looks to do things that prevent this. It wants a very gentle wave. Inflation goes up a little bit, inflation goes down a little bit, but you don't want spikes.
But with a specific question of should you accept it, right? I could make the case that if somebody wanted to pay me that would otherwise not do business with me, purely incremental business, and wanted to pay me in shoelaces, but I knew I could immediately turn those shoelaces into US dollars, I'd do that deal.
Exactly.
As an entrepreneur, I would do that deal.
Yeah, and I actually want to piggyback on that. That's the question I wanted to get to. There was a time when credit card acceptance wasn't the
Right.
Right? And merchants took the risk on the 4 points that they were losing for that transaction to procure the business. And even now, there are, in retail, there are gas stations that bifurcate their pricing strategy, right? So it's $1 or it's $1.15 as a function of whether you're paying with cash or credit. So I can envision a time not too far off where people will advertise, we'll gladly accept Bitcoin because they'll get the incremental business and it won't be disruptive enough to their underlying revenue stream where that risk would be worth it to certain revenue.
Right, well, Scott, the way the U.S. government solved the equation of getting people to believe that this $1 bill, this piece of paper, that in of itself is worthless, was to back it by gold. And then once once the country believed that, you could still, in theory, go in and exchange your dollar for gold. But if everybody in the country simultaneously said, I want my gold, then the value of the dollar goes to zero.
Yeah, but full faith and credit in the U.S. government is not appreciably different than a highly confident letter that was it Milken used to issue, right?
Yeah.
But
that's true.
Value out of nothing,
Right.
Because he was bright that way.
Yeah.
This seems to me to be kind of that next thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Name,
Tom's got a question.
Do you think there's enough Bitcoins, much like Wall Street on the sideline, that as business owners, we could accept it and pick up a couple of points by charging extra for it?
Yes, I think so.
As opposed to cashing in the banks?
Yeah, I mean, again, to a willing seller, sure.
Yeah, willing buyer, willing seller,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
I actually think the more interesting discussion is not about Bitcoin at all. Because I think Bitcoin is it is a store of value, it's digital gold. I think the way more interesting discussion is creating real cryptocurrencies that will trade and that will be used as a medium of exchange when Alibaba and Amazon and Apple create their currencies, and they will. Those currencies will be larger than the currencies of virtually every other nation in the world.
They're their own economies.
Exactly right.
I mean, that's exactly
and you see
right.
this happening, right? You see it happening in the political environment that we're in, where companies are disagreeing with policies that are established by government, and you see companies so large at this point that they're almost beyond the reach of government. And
not only are they their own economies, but they already have our faith and trust.
Right. Absolutely. That's the thing, right? I mean, if John's Billiard Hall decided to create a currency, I doubt that anyone here is going to be willing to rely on that as a medium of exchange for the reasons we talked about. But if Amazon and Alibaba and companies like that all do it,
you pile in.
It's just absolutely incredible when you think about what can happen.
Yeah. Part two of my question is the volatility in the market being so much, it seems like a tremendous opportunity for like day traders.
Oh, it is.
well, that's what, there are crypto funds today. I mean, that's all they're,
It is and it isn't, right? Because, if you want to be married to your computer where it's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week market, so.
Yeah, but the young kids do. They do want to be married to the computer. Right?
But the thing is,
it's done in software also.
There's a lot of
it's auto traded.
There's a lot of things that preclude you from being able to make a lot of money as the arbitrage windows close quickly because it is a global, effective.
I mean, crypto traders they deal with bands and technical analysis. They have all that stuff that the stock traders do. They're analyzing all that. They talk about, Bitcoin's has a $6,400 bottom and it'll start to bounce up. They're doing all that stuff. It's kind of amazing.
It's no different from day trading.
Yeah,
stocks.
for sure.
Let's talk about practical uses for cryptocurrencies with businesses. If I am going to tokenize my companies, or if I'm going to make my company, put my company on the blockchain, create a token economy so that people can buy things, what kinds of businesses are best for that right now? What's practical uses? Micropayments? What kinds of things? Vishal, I know you're very into these businesses, and Josh.
Yeah, I think there are two parts to it. First is what kind of businesses can use blockchain as a technology, and second is what kind of businesses can use blockchain as a technology and use tokens as a means of something. of value. So the first part is relatively simple, which is what kind of companies can have blockchain as an underlying technology or underlying substrate, right? So if we look 20 years back, networking, internet, websites, 10 years back, mobile app, 2008, 7, 6, iPhone apps, everything is now like everyone wants to build app. Like iOS platform has become the standard. 5 years down the line, maybe like we talk about MySQL database or any other database, blockchain will become the de facto database because it is immutable, transparent, all of that. So that revolution is already happening. Companies will adopt and make those changes. Some of them will be early adopters and some of them will be not early adopters. Eventually they will be pushed to adopt it. But that's the easier part. Now, who will be the early adopters depends on several use cases. For example, does the application has a need for strong trust? Does the application has a need for traceability or transparency? For example, in pharmaceutical business, you would have heard about a lot of patents from Walmart or Whole Foods about tracking food, organic food coming from different countries and being traced until the last mile. Why is that? Because we want to trace everything using IoTs on a blockchain kind of database so that me as an end user can go and see where is the apple that I'm buying is coming from and what were the checkpoints that it was being transferred, right? So, and that is a use case which made it more popular, but really the pharma use case and like other ERP and supply chain use cases are the one which will be the early adopters of blockchain as an application, as an underlying substrate or database. With that, I'll slightly segue into the token aspect of blockchain applications. Now, the token aspects could be things like loyalty points. Like I have a store and so some companies might use tokens to give loyalty points or rewards or whatnot. And some companies might create a system to enable other companies like SaaS businesses to create those or use those systems. Similar to how Ethereum smart contract or virtual machine works. The thing with the token-based models is you really have to think about the incentives which came up several times here. Like what is the incentive and why is the value of the token, or if I'm giving token to the end user, why is the value of the token, or what's the incentive for the end customer to hold the token, and what can they do with the tokens later on? So it's a slightly different, but it has lots of use cases, but once you get into token, then you also start thinking about securities and utilities and the inherent value of holding the token and how do you gain the token, and the business problem becomes much complex in that sense, because you're now thinking about creating a new business as opposed to using the blockchain as a technology for an existing business. So I would say that's the distinction that we should make all the time. Like in my own startup, like I'm using blockchain as a technology. I don't want to worry right now about what's the incentive model. I don't know if that will work or not, but I need to focus on my current customers, give them more trusted. Like one of the books has, the companies will be disrupted by more trusted versions of their own companies, was the headline of the book that I saw on the thing. When I'm building for my own products, I'm thinking first, how can I use blockchain as a technology to make the system more transparent for the end user, for the end customer, so that they can get the full value out of the product that they are using today. But several other entrepreneurs are disrupting by creating new incentive models on top of Uber and Lyft and like ticketing systems and loyalty point systems, and you name it, like it's everywhere.
Yep, you could have it like an Uber on blockchain. They're building an Airbnb on blockchain. They're building a Dropbox on blockchain. They're building all this stuff. They'll be, as he said, more trusted versions of what's out there. And those companies can probably charge a premium because they'll be more trusted. If you know your apple is coming from Peru and it's fair trade and it's organic and it is definitively viewable through the blockchain, that apple traveled in this, and everything was appropriate, maybe you charge 10 cents more for that apple and people will do it. right now they slap on organic or fair trade. Nobody knows if it really is. So that's.
I think you made. I was going to say. I think you made a really good point about differentiating between using blockchain and or using crypto, because I think in the short term, a lot of the real use cases that will solve problems are going to be things that don't involve a cryptocurrency. Sure. It's going to be using the blockchain and the power of that technology immediately to do things like, you know, like I said earlier, Sweden's putting their title registry, you know, on the blockchain as a way to reduce the costs, and you know they'll save a lot of money by doing that. That doesn't involve a cryptocurrency, but they're utilizing that.
Josh.
Sure. So so speaking to the difference between using blockchain and crypto and using blockchain just as a regular piece of your technology strategy. So my company, Teleapp, we built an artificial intelligence engine, which you can think of as like kind of like a brain, that can detect, analyze, and predict human behavioral trends. The most valuable thing to us is our production server. That's the brain. That's where it all sits. Well, not yet. That's the brain. That's where it all sits. And so for us, I guess you could say one of our security concerns is what if that thing is eventually hacked? Or what if someone else is somehow able to push code to our production server, right? So for us, that's a problem. So we use blockchain in order to track code from our test servers to our production server, trying to ultimately eliminate the potential for someone that does not have access to the production server to actually get code up there. So that's how we're using blockchain on a regular basis as part of our company's strategy, just to maintain security. So that's answer. I think the first thing that you were looking to get from me.
And that doesn't involve any kind of cryptocurrency.
No, nothing at all. Now, we happen to be crypto enthusiasts. We've been watching it for as long as it's existed, and when everyone started getting all crazy excited about it, so did we. And so we started saying we're always looking for use cases. You know, can we get the engine to predict this, or can we get the engine to predict that? And so the logical question for us was, can we get the engine to predict which coins are going to go up and which ones are going to go down, right? We have the engine loves data. Right? So one of our first use cases was in social media, just because the data was free. We could have as much data as we want from Instagram and from Twitter, and we were able to predict what types of stores a person is more likely to go into. So when it came to crypto, it was a little more interesting to us. Hey, could we actually predict which ones will go up and which ones will go down? And so the question really was, at the time there were like 1,900 coins, which ones trend together? Right, so the idea was if Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple are going up on some kind of sliding scale by between 7 and 12%, maybe Cardano or Stellar Lunar, which are lesser known coins, will all of a sudden take a 30% dip, right? And so knowing this information in advance would be great. And so we wrote a program that kind of did this. We started in November when everyone started to get crazy, and so we kind of sidetracked from our core mission, what we do. And for about 2 months, we built this really, the user interface is ugly, but we didn't really care because it's just us using it. And so and it was able to do just that. It turns out that yes, there are cryptocurrencies that trend together, and so in a very simple regression kind of prediction model, you're not factoring in data that's coming in from external factors, but we wanted to do that. So we had data coming in from Google, we had information coming in from Reddit, we had information coming in from Twitter. So anytime there was like a specific word trending, the software the engine had to determine, is this a positive? There are like 3 levels, right? There's positive, there's really impact, there's positive impact, no impact, and negative impact. What type of article is this, based on some words or things that that we can actually measure upon? And so we did this thing, and so it didn't have any type of really pretty user interface. So I had to visualize. So we would see a trend, right? So a trend is like when a group of things is happening in a place and a time, and then something else happens in some other place and time, and there's some sort of correlation. So in order to visualize this, we had to get a whole bunch of monitors, and of course I put them at my desk. And so on the top left, well, it's kind of a small picture here, you can't really see it, but if you look really closely, you can actually see these coins that are trending together, and it was really quite fascinating. And it turns out that there was relationships and correlations between which coins trend together, when they trend together. And we learned a lot about things like predicting when people are waking up in the morning and getting to their computers and all of a sudden, starting to trade, right? So why is this thing taking a dip? Did something bad happen? No, maybe just everyone went to sleep.
Yeah, everyone in Korea went to sleep. and
Exactly.
The Americans
Right.
haven't woken up yet.
Exactly. And so there's all these types of things happening at the same time. Then you've got positive articles coming out, negative articles, neutral articles. And so you have all this stuff happening at the same time. At one of those points, I was just playing Minecraft because I was just like watching it and so fascinated. and so
How much money did you make? Come on, get
Right,
it.
so if-
How do we get in?
So so as a frugal, really cost-conscious startup that has angel capital, angel investors, we're not taking their hundreds of thousands and putting it unfortunately into this. We would have made 16% more than we had put in had we actually used real money and not like fake money. And there are things you have to think about, like is speed of transaction important? What are the fees associated with trading a transaction? So all these things have to be factored in. So we did not develop a commercial-ready product, nor were we supposed to, and we kind of stopped messing around with this in June.
If you
But-
sold that as a subscription model, you could make the models self-perpetuate.
Right. So yeah. So
That's
if you want to cut a check for us to continue developing this, happy to talk.
Mark,
Yeah.
if we can, I'd like to bring this down a little bit to real, actual use cases that companies are using, where companies are using blockchain right now. You mentioned traceability, right? The pharmaceutical industry is regulated, and they have to be able to trace every pill from manufacturing to end user. And millions upon millions of dollars have been spent over the last 10 or so years by software companies to develop software solutions so that pharmaceutical companies can adhere to the regulations. And boom, blockchain comes, and blockchain is a far more cost-efficient way to adhere to the regulations. So we have pharmaceutical company clients who are now developing blockchain solutions to replace the software that's been developed over the last 10 or 15 years. I'm currently representing a Fortune 200 company that is considering it, it's in the supply chain, right? So when you think about, let me back up, I don't know, I think we've said this earlier, but blockchain is a great disintermediation force, where historically we needed all of these people in the middle to aggregate and to bring product together or bring information together, etc. Blockchain allows you to eliminate all the guys in the middle. Someone said about democratization. It's the ultimate in connecting the beginning to the end, the manufacturer to the end user. So it's being used in supply chain. It's being used in fintech. Banks, private equity firms, other kinds of institutions are recognizing that blockchain poses an existential threat.
Yes.
Because they're intermediaries. So they have two choices. They can pretend it's not happening, which is like standing at the beach and saying, I don't want the waves to hit the shore, or they can change their underlying business processes. That's exactly what's happening today in fintech. You mentioned earlier Humanity. Humanity is the company that is applying blockchain and smart contracts and cryptocurrency to allow people like us to decide what happens with our own healthcare data, our own financial data, our own consumer preference data. These are today. This is happening right now. Blockchain applications happening from small companies to Fortune 100
I
companies.
want to talk about that in real quick, the Humanity example. Imagine what happens if, like, people start selling your data, your medical data, which they are, right? And even though it's worth hundreds, it's probably worth hundreds or thousands of dollars a year. Every guy that buys it, or everything that buys it, they're only going to really pay you $1, or maybe it's only worth $1, like, for every time, right? So there's this micropayment issue. That's why a lot of this stuff comes it is all combined. You could say there's no, blockchain. You could use it without the cryptocurrencies and all that stuff, and you can. But a lot of times cryptocurrencies are vital to within an economy, because micropayments are a critical factor of things you could do. There might have been things that you would have had to sell subscriptions for, like the newspapers had to sell $10 a month, or Netflix had to sell, $10 a month subscriptions because it's not worth it to charge you, 50 cents a movie for Netflix, or every time I read an article, it's 5 cents. It's just not possible to do it with the credit card system today. So, you have that ability of micropayments with cryptocurrencies too. Is there any?
I got a good example that's being worked on now, which I think is really interesting. One of the things that a lot of people fear about things like blockchain technology is that it's going to take away jobs, or it's going to, it could eliminate or reduce, our ability to make money. And actually, I think it presents a tremendous amount of opportunity. This was one business case that I was reading about that I think is really interesting. Is computers. So all of us have computers at our house. All of us have multiple computers at our house, and all of those computers have processing power. Mm-hmm. And for roughly probably 19 to 23 hours a day, that computer is not using its processing power because you're not using it. Well, what if we could create a blockchain company or a blockchain technology that will allow you to sell your processing power while you're downtime, while you're asleep? And you can wake up in the morning and you can get paid through some type of a token or some type of a unit of value for that processing power.
They already exist.
Yeah, that's happening, and that's happening, and that's iterating right now to a point where we think it could be out there to the general public, meaning the Tom, Dick, and Harry down the street. To be able to sell their processing power. I mean, the other thing I'll say is, being in the accounting industry, Deloitte is the largest accounting firm in the world. And when you think about, large firms that are leaders in terms of consulting, they have 2,000 employees whose only job it is to understand, investigate, and proliferate blockchain technology, right? So like you talk about the healthcare industry and how they're investing in it. The best way to know about whether or not something is going to really take hold is just to look around and see who the big players are and whether or not they're willing to invest in it. And I think everywhere you look, you'll see it. So I think it's just a matter of when it's going to trickle in. Bill Gates said we always tend to overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate the long-term impact. And I think that's what a lot of these are.
That's a great line. We only have like 10 minutes or so, or a little bit less.
6 minutes.
A little bit less. I want to talk about if you, in the past you wanted to incorporate or do whatever, the big choice was Delaware for whatever reason, which you guys can talk about. But there's new places that are becoming important. If you want to have blockchain technology or have a token economy, Wyoming just put together this set of laws that really make it super advantageous to incorporate there. And I want Chris, I think or Kurt, whatever, talk about the regulations or how you can register your company as a blockchain company. Why would we go to Wyoming or Georgia or Arizona?
So since we have about 4.5 minutes. So Wyoming did something that seems unique, but isn't really. They're giving tax breaks. Yeah, so what Wyoming did is they said, I think the population of Wyoming is like 550,000 people. That's the entire state. It's a pretty big state. So needless to say, there's not a big tax base there. There's not a lot of jobs. They have good energy and natural resources. What does blockchain consume? Lots of energy and natural resources. So as a way to basically bolster their economy, they said that there's no tax on cryptocurrency at the state level as you dispose of it. And so it's really no different than like New Jersey's got various tax incentives. If you build in an economically depressed area, you get tax credits or tax breaks for a certain period of time. That's what Wyoming's done, and I think it's a smart move. It's just recognizing that they've got resources that make their energy more cost efficient, which makes it more cost efficient to attract this type of business to your economy.
And even
Yeah.
if you throw out the tax piece and just look at the
energy,
well,
right.
just look at the legal side, right? We always see that new technologies come about, and it takes a while for the law to catch up with the technology.
Right.
And when you look at things like smart contracts and doing transactions in a blockchain-based economy, states that look at their legal code and how they recognize those transactions and deal with them and address those sooner have a chance to attract businesses, because there's less doubt about, will my business or will my transaction be supported in the court of law versus.
Well, here's a great example of that. I know this, our worlds are very much the same. Digital signatures, which are now widely accepted. I'm sure everyone in the room here has DocuSigned a document. That took a change in the law. First there was ink, then there was the fax machine, and then it evolved to digital signatures. So when you get into smart contracts, which are not written in the way that we think of contracts, where there's a document that's many pages long, and there are still instances where you will probably have to enforce a smart contract and have it recognized in a jurisdiction in which you're seeking to enforce it. That's that's just still evolving, because in a lot of ways, you don't even have something tangible to walk into a court of law and say, I want to enforce what's in here. It's in here. Just trust me.
But the legislatures that can get around to
Right.
addressing that in their law sooner rather
Absolutely.
than later.
Make
This
themselves more
is so cool.
attractive.
Take
Yeah.
this back, right? We're sitting here talking to you guys, and I believe that every one of your businesses will be impacted by blockchain and smart contracts. But you know what? Kurt and I, and I'm sure you think about this too because we live in a similar world, I'm at a very, very large law firm. And I have said, I'm part of the management team of that law firm, and I have said to my own law firm, 20 years from now, instead of needing 500 lawyers, we're going to be 50 lawyers. Because automation and legal tech and smart contracts are going to change the way we do business as well. Kurt's point is spot on. 5, 10 years from now, we're all going to think how quaint it is that we once wrote contracts using the English language.
Yeah.
Because contracts are going to be written in code.
And printed them on paper.
How ridiculous is that?
I mean, Dave, when was the last time you literally took a letter, folded it up, put a stamp on it,
Never.
and sent it? Right.
We
You
only-
can't-
guys, we
why
only
was
had
it?
Last time
Right.
we billed for that.
I'm going to play Donald Trump for a second. Remove that man. Remove that man.
Before we got a minute left. Chris, it's important. I know when the internet started, everything was tax-free, and we just say everybody buy it. Is there any tax implications of?
Okay, you got 1
accepting
minute.
In a minute.
this?
In 1 minute. All right.
Well, 30 seconds by the time you get started with questions.
Is there anything that's like that dawned at the beginning of the internet? Is there any advantages that we could take by
That's easy.
creating
No.
a blockchain company or accepting Bitcoin? I mean, are we getting away with anything?
I'm gonna say, I'll keep this short. It was the Wild West for the last probably 7 years. It's becoming substantially less wild than it has been in the past as the IRS is starting to get their arms around crypto, and they're getting cooperation from exchanges that will disclose how people are, like what the trading patterns are, and exchanges are now issuing 1099s. So it's just like on the legal side where it's slow and it's taking a long time, but there's going to be like kind of brackets put around it. There's not substantial benefit. I mean, as somebody mentioned before, cryptocurrency is deemed to be property for purposes of the IRS, which means that basically whenever you exchange it, whether it's for dollars, peanuts, or other crypto, it's a taxable event. And that's kind of just the short answer.
All right, so, we put this panel together to hopefully give you guys a better understanding of blockchain and cryptocurrencies and tokens of the economy. These are all important issues. Your business is going to have to think about it. Think about what that book said, to Richie Aguaro. All businesses will be replaced by trusted versions of themselves. blockchain technology can make your business a trusted version, give you transparency to your clients and things like that. So thank you to the panelists. I appreciate you guys.